welcome to Picture This 2003, part of our ongoing series through all the Lord of the Rings years. It just felt so weird to just jump around with Lord of the Rings. We wanted to do them all in succession, and now we've reached the end of the road. So, Chad, how you doing? Welcome to 2003. You were alive during this point. I was too, but I was only 4 or 5. And you were significantly older than that. Not too much older, though. You're still young. How you doing, Chad?
Yeah, I was around 13 around this time, and I wasn't like I've said in probably other 2 episodes. I wasn't super into Lord of the Rings around the time. I kind of regret it now because it probably was really fantastic to see them in the theaters. I know you were only 4, so you wouldn't even appreciate it, even if someone would have taken you. But no, I mean it's bittersweet because I don't know. Like I was like really excited for doing the Lord of the Rings series, and now it's over. I mean, well, we got this episode to go, but it's nearly over. And I know we got other ones to cover. Like we're going to do another series probably next year that we can talk about later. But
forget about
yeah,
it.
it's just
that's a hint. I don't know.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a hint. But yeah, no, I mean it's bittersweet. But I'm excited to cover this episode because. I think there was a lot of great movies. I'm interested to hear your takes. I know from talking with you that you might have some maybe like lukewarm takes, I guess.
Maybe. Yeah, that's a good word for it. Lukewarm takes, because obviously there are movies that have like been ingrained in the cinematic, lexicon of history, whatever, and are beloved. And then there are movies that like in this slate even that I feel like aren't really as talked about, as celebrated today, that I think are worth celebrating. Some I don't think are. But we'll get to it. Let me just tell y'all what the 5 movies are in case you haven't been following our show. If you're a first-time listener, welcome, enjoy. Hope you enjoy. Those movies are, we're starting it out with The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, Lost in Translation, Master and Commander, The Far Side of the World, Mystic River, and Seabiscuit. So 5 films from various directors, some directors earlier in their careers, some directors well within their careers. We will talk about them all. But before we do, we always like to set the scene and talk about the history of the time itself. 2003, we talked a lot about 9/11 and its influence on 2001, kind of trickling into 2002. But 2003, Chad, give us the lowdown of what was going on in the world to help us understand the historical context so we can then kind of put these films in perspective.
Absolutely. 2003, you were 4, I was 13. I was like knee deep in getting into one of my favorite shows, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. That was a little 13-year-old Chad for you. History, though, 2003 was designated the International Year of Fresh Water. The Iraq War officially begins. Boo to that. There are anti-war protests worldwide. The human genome was sequenced to 99.9% accuracy. That's pretty high, pretty accurate. Tesla Incorporated was founded, and the website 4chan was launched. That's really all that I found interesting.
I was going to say, International Year of Fresh Water. And we have a lot of water in these films. We have Master and Commander, which takes place fully on water for the most part.
Not fresh water.
And then Mystic River, which is in the name. So I think it's interesting that this year gives us 2 movies that are primarily, or one that is primarily set in water, one that is named about in water. And Lord of the Rings has some water in there too, right?
And 2 with really, really long titles.
Yes, very long titles. The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, and Master and Commander, The Far Side of the World. That was probably exhausting considering those 2 films won most of the Oscars that night because they had to keep saying these long titles over and over and over again.
And you have to make sure you get all of the thes in there. There's a lot of thes.
Yeah. No, Lord of the Rings does not just start with the L. It starts with a T. But on our show, it starts with the L in alphabetical order. It's very confusing. Nonetheless.
Drop those articles. I got some births and I got some deaths for you here.
Wow, you got some births and deaths. Let's hear them.
Just a few. They're really young peoples. We have Greta Thunberg, remember her?
Mm-hmm.
Olivia Rodrigo, Elsie Fisher from 8th grade fame.
Cool.
You've said this accurately before, I believe. Quinzane Wallace.
That was it? Well
there you
done,
go.
Chad.
And then from It and Shazam fame and Luca fame, Jack Dylan Grazer.
Yeah, great middle name.
There you go. Here are the what you have something?
I was just gonna say my sister was also born in 2003. Shout out Nina. I know you listen, so shout out.
I didn't know that, or else I would have wrote that down.
No, it's fine. She's not a celebrity yet. Her name is gonna be in big lights because she is the most talented of the 3 for sure. So just you wait, America. But
look out for her. All right, here's some deaths. Pretty sad ones in here.
Mm.
Fred Rogers, a
Ah,
great human being in my opinion. Robert Stack, June Carter Cash,
mm,
uh, Dick Cusack, the father of John and Joan, Gregory Peck. I believe
mm.
we nominated him one year.
Yeah, I think he
Um,
he won for one of us for Gentleman's Agreement. Yeah.
yeah, Katharine Hepburn,
Wow.
Buddy Hackett, Barry White, Bob Hope, Charles Bronson, Johnny Cash. So
Mm.
both Cashes died that
Wow.
year.
That's sad.
Robert Palmer, Robert Kardashian, Elliott Smith, a great musical artist, Penny Singleton, and from one of your favorite movies, I think, spoiler for a future episode, Frank the Irishman Sheeran.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, very, very sad group of unfortunately departed people, especially in Oscars history. I mean, Bob Hope, we don't necessarily see him a lot nowadays in a lot of pop culture media, but he was, I believe, if not the most awards hosted, he was the most consecutive or something like that. Like he hosted the Oscars so many times. So for an Oscars show, that is a very significant loss. And I know this Oscar
Mhm.
ceremony, not to tip my hat to later when I talk about it, a lot of it was devoted to Bob Hope, the in memoriam. So
Yeah. Well, I got some albums for you here. This is not in any order, just what I have, because I have some physical ones here. We have Room on Fire by The Strokes.
nice, nice.
We have Hail to the Thief by Radiohead, one of my favorite bands ever. Elephants by the White Stripes, great
That's a
album.
cool cover. Yeah.
Give Up by the Postal Service. And
Nice.
also from that band, God, I'm blanking on his damn name. Death Cab for Cutie, Transatlanticism.
Nice.
And then we also have The Earth is Not a Cold Dead Place by Explosions in the Sky. They gave a lot of their music to another one of my favorite shows, Friday Night Lights. Absolution by Muse, which actually I might have that. I didn't grab it. Shoots Too Narrow by the Shins. Deloused in the Comatorium by the Mars Volta. And The Magnolia Electric Company by Songs Ohia. I don't know.
Interesting. So those are the albums, those are the births, deaths, of history, and as we like to do on the show, we like to progress into the Oscar ceremony. But of course, it all starts on Oscar nomination morning, where there are some unfortunate snubs. So we always like to talk about those first. Some notable films. Chad likes to talk about a lot of the films of 2003, not just his Oscar-worthy ones, but all the ones that might be remembered for opposite reasons. And I have a list as well. But Chad, tell us about some of the best and maybe worst movies of 2003, because spoiler alert, I think the worst movie ever made came out in 2003, and you might agree with that.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah,
Yes,
okay.
what the story?
So yeah, I have my list of notable films, and then some that I think could have been Best Picture worthy. Here's are my notable films: Just Married, rest in peace, Brittany Murphy. Kangaroo Jack, Final
Oh,
Destination 2,
nice.
Shanghai Nights, Daredevil, Old School, Bringing Down the House, Inspector Gadget 2, Agent Cody Banks. I was 13. Okay. Bend It Like Beckham, Dreamcatcher, Blue Collar Comedy Tour, the movie. If you need to know anything about 2003, they were big. Okay. Head of State, Anger Management, Holes, Malibu's Most Wanted, one of Dylan's favorites, Daddy Daycare, The Matrix
Yes.
Reloaded, Bruce Almighty, The Italian Job, Too Fast, Too Furious. I saw that in the theater. Whale Rider, The Even Stevens movie,
Mm.
Rugrats Go Wild, Hulk, Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl, The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, Bad Boys 2, American Wedding, Freddy vs. Jason, Grind, My Boss's Daughter, Secondhand Lions, Underworld, Duplex, The Rundown, Intolerable Cruelty, Kill Bill Volume 1, The Matrix Revolutions. There was another one. Love Actually, The Cat in the Hat, Bad Santa, The Last Samurai, Monster, Big Fish, Cold Mountain, and Peter Pan.
Wow.
And here are my Best Picture worthy: City of God, Finding Nemo, 28 Days Later, Matchstick Men, Shattered Glass, Elf, School of Rock, and The Room.
Wow. Oh, okay. So you put it in there. Like I said earlier, this is a great peak year for bad cinema. The Room, obviously one of the best worst movies ever made. I love it just as much as you do, Chad. Maybe someday they'll right the wrong and nominate the next Tommy Wiseau film, if there ever is one, for Best Picture. We got close to it for
Good lord.
Disaster Artist. Unfortunately, that might be the closest we get. But yeah, Kangaroo Jack, a staple of my childhood, as bad or good as it may be to you. I think it's amazing. And The Cat in the Hat, another staple of my childhood that I think is phenomenal. I also haven't seen it in probably 20 years, so
The
maybe
one
I
that
need
pissed
a
off the
rewatch.
Seuses.
Yep. And then a big year for Disney straight to video. I mean, I'm in the midst of a Disney binge for a project I'm doing on the channel soon. We're going to be talking about a Disney animated film shortly on Picture This, spoiler alert. But a big year for direct to video sequels, including 101 Dalmatians 2. Patches London Adventure. No one remembers that. Yep, neither do I. The Jungle Book 2, which I actually think is quite cute and has some good earworms in there. Piglet's Big Movie, a great underrated film for an underrated hero. Like Chad said, the Even Stevens movie, not a direct-to-video Disney movie, but it was a Disney Channel original movie. The Lizzie McGuire movie, in a similar vein. The Cheetah Girls, big year for DComs as well. You have Kim Possible, A Stitch in Time, which was a hybrid DCOM and animated straight-to-video. And Stitch the movie, which I have no recollection of. It came out, I don't know how close to actual Lilo and Stitch. It must have been a year later, so I don't know how they did that. But yeah, great year for those Disney straight to video movies. I watched them all. I loved them all when I was a kid, but I need to rewatch them because it's been a long time. And Brother Bear, another one I really like, but that one is an actual one that I think is like actual quality. It was nominated for Best Animated Feature. But yeah, you hit on all the important ones. Obviously, the Matrix movies were big. Pirates of the Caribbean, Finding Nemo, just amazing. Should have been Best Picture worthy. And you did mention it, but I do want to say my favorite adaptation of Peter Pan came out in 2003. The one with what's his name, Jason Isaacs as Captain Hook, is just so good. Just an amazing interpretation of the source material without some of the bad stereotypes of older versions and with a little bit more wonder than some of the new ones. So I do recommend that one. It's got a great score as well. Like that score I listen to all the time. I love it. But now transitioning into the ceremony itself, the 76th Academy Awards, the big story being the sweep. The sweep heard across the nation. Lord of the Rings, Return of the King won 11 awards. It was nominated for 11 awards. I know we usually save that for later, but that's important because it made history. It was the biggest sweep of all time. Films had swept before, particularly films Gigi and the Last Emperor all won 9 out of all 9 of the awards it was nominated for, including Best Picture for both. But no film had been nominated for as many awards and won all the awards like The Return of the King. Even Ben-Hur and Titanic, which tied it with 11 awards. Titanic and Ben-Hur also lost some awards. They didn't win every award they were up for. Lord of the Rings won every award it was up for that year. It was it was hosted by Billy Crystal. As I talked about earlier, Bob Hope was a big focus of the In Memoriam. Otherwise, not a ton to say about the actual ceremony. I mean, Lord of the Rings was the story of the ceremony. And you look at this chart, I mean, it was kind of a done deal going into the night. I mean, I don't like to say anything's a lock. I mean, it's obviously a term we use in Oscar vernacular, but I mean, this is as much of a lock as I've ever seen on the show. Lord of the Rings won Critics' Choice, it won Golden Globe, it won PGA, and it won BAFTA. So, like, the only thing that maybe could have rivaled it was Lost in Translation, which won the Globe for musical comedy, but it wasn't even nominated at BAFTA. So even then, it had that going against it. Master and Commander was the only other film nominated at all the ceremonies, and it didn't win a single thing. So you look at that chart, it was pretty obvious going into the night that Lord of the Rings was most likely 90% chance going to win Best Picture. People didn't necessarily know it was going to win everything else, but it did, even without acting nominations, which I think is huge, because if you add acting nominations to that, which I very well think it could have gotten nominated for and should have gotten nominated for as well, it may have taken it home even more. Who knows? But a really significant Oscar ceremony for that fact. And we haven't seen anything like it since. La La Land was supposedly going to be like the next big sweeper, and it lost in some big categories that no one expected. Like it lost sound to Hacksaw Ridge and Arrival, which no one saw coming, and it lost Best Picture, which was big. So like that was the closest thing we've seen to like a potential sweep with so many nominations, but we haven't been able to get a film like that since. So a pretty monumental year for sure. So now transitioning into these 5 films, let's start with the big one. It's the first alphabetically. That's how we do it here. The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. Chad, tell us about this movie that I don't think anyone's seen, right? Such a hidden
Right.
gem, right?
Right. The Lord of the Rings: The Return of the King, directed by Peter Jackson, written by Fran Walsh, Philippa Boyens, and Peter Jackson. Cinematography by Andrew Lesney. Music by Howard Shore. Starring Elijah Wood, Sean Astin, Ian McKellen, Liv Tyler, Viggo Mortensen, Kate Blanchett, John Rhys Davies, Bernard Hill, Billy Boyd, Dominic Monaghan, Orlando Bloom, Hugo Weaving, Miranda Otto, David Winham, Carl Urban, John Noble, Andy Serkis, Ian Holm, and Sean Beans. Synopsis: this is the end of the epic trilogy for Frodo and Sam to go destroy the ring, the evil ring. I made that one up.
No, I mean,
Based
that's it. Yeah.
based on The Return of the King by J.R.R. Tolkien.
That's right. So we've come to the conclusion, and just a fair warning: we did watch the theatrical cut because that is what was nominated and what won all the Oscars. And yeah, I mean, it's Lord of the Rings. It's a finale. And Chad, I want to ask you because you, like you said, you typically watch the trilogy from beginning to end, but sometimes you trail off in the middle, and sometimes like so. You said you've seen Fellowship more than you've seen these other two. So having now completed this trilogy, for the show, what are your thoughts on this as a finale? Obviously, a lot of people love it, but and I'm sure you like it. But I'd love to know your thoughts.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think this one's close to loving it. Another thing, I am wearing my Hogwarts shirt today because out of protest, because they can give all the awards to this kind of movie, but like nothing to Harry Potter, and it's infuriating. But this movie is great. I think it deserved most, if not all, of its awards. And yeah, it's just one of the best. I think like endings to a trilogy
Hmm.
ever. Like I know you love Return of the Jedi. You love a great capper to a trilogy. Toy Story 3. Some of your favorites are that. Some of my favorites too are just cappers too. Like I love The World's End. Stuff like this. I think this one nails it. This one really challenges our characters. And just kind of like yeah, and just the way they are able to actually finally complete this epic adventure. You still have challenges for these characters. Like I've said in the past, my favorite parts are the parts with Frodo, Sam, and Gollum / Smeagol.
Hmm.
It's interesting how it starts with Smeagol, and it's like
The
actually
backstory.
Andy Serkis. Yeah, I always thought that his voice what didn't start out that way, and it kind of like morphed, and they were like, nope, just have him still do that voice as that character, and that part doesn't change. And it's so interesting. He's such an interesting character to see him kill, I guess it was his brother, right?
Yeah. Or best friend, maybe.
Whatever.
Cousin. I have
Okay,
confirmation
either
there.
way,
Smeagol and his cousin Deagle. Because
that's
I
right,
knew the name. The
Deagle.
names were so close, but I was like, are they related? Yes, they are.
And you just continuously see the manipulation and perversion that this ring brings people, and it even makes people murderous. And a lot of the growth that you see, I guess, from like one half of Gollum, it kind of comes into he is the bad guy of the film. I mean, you start to see him say, we're going to go and we're going to take the ring and it's going to be ours and we're going to lead them into trouble. And, you see Sam hearing this and he tries to tell Frodo, but Frodo has grown like this allegiance to Smeagol now because he's like, Smeagol knows what he's doing. He's going to take us to where we need to go because, we don't know what we're doing and we need to get there, even if the means of getting there are hard and we have to trust weird characters and stuff. But I love how this kind of challenges their relationship so much. And Frodo ends up mistakenly or erroneously leaving Sam's side, and he gets in serious trouble to the fact that Sam thinks he's dead at one point, and then he gets stolen, and he's like, shit,
Yeah, because you see also the parallels with Frodo and Smeagol's story. I think that that opening scene is to illustrate the fact that like this ring really does lead to temptation to an extreme degree, and you can kind of see glimmers of it in the first two films, but this film you really see Frodo start to almost succumb to that.
Master, come to Smeagol.
And honestly, that's why I think Frodo is not necessarily my favorite version. This is not my favorite version of Frodo because he is more of that like kind of
Same.
blinded individual. Like I honestly think he's kind of a dick at times in this, but I think
Yes.
that's meaningful to him and Sam's relationship and to illustrate just how villainous Smeagol slash Gollum is and how villainous this ring is. The ring
Mhm.
essentially symbolizes the main villain of this film. Like it's hard to pinpoint which character is the villain of this series. Is it Saruman?
Mhm.
Is it Sauron? Is it Gollum? And I think it's really the ring itself is the
Yeah.
villain really in this whole thing because it's the kind of thing that unites all of the havoc. Without
Well,
this ring, there's not all this conflict. You know what I mean?
yeah. Yeah, I mean, exactly. Like, there's so many great antagonists in the series as a
Oh yeah,
whole. You got Grima Wormtongue and just,
as well. Yeah.
everybody in the three films. You have so many great antagonists, but they're all united by the same thing: is
Hmm.
Sauron and his evil ass ring.
Yeah.
And so yeah, they're all manipulated by those forces. And then you can even see, like you said, Frodo kind of being a dick. That's kind of like a transition from him being like one of the like he's a Paddington, as we like to say, in
Yeah.
the very beginning, and then now you can see that he's able to go to other lengths and be troubling and kind of a jerk,
Mhm.
like you
And
said. But
I remember
it's
when you said that he was a Paddington in an earlier episode, I even challenged that and I said, "Well, remember, but the third movie, he's really not. It's Sam who's more the Paddington."
Mhm.
But that's because early on he is a Paddington. You're right. Like he has this progression, and I think that's
Yeah.
what's so interesting about this franchise is that your main hero himself can kind of succumb to the fears of what Gandalf saw from the beginning and the nervousness, and then going back when you see even the prequels with the Hobbits and reading the Hobbit to see that that also affected Bilbo, and you even see that a little bit
Mhm.
in Bilbo in this franchise, in this
Oh
trilogy,
yeah.
is kind of like his blindedness with this ring and the possession and the evil it can draw from you. So I
Oh
like the
yeah.
fact that he's a different character that he is from Fellowship to now, and that's a great point that you make. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Just like the way Frodo is in this is just he's kind of been transformed by this ring. And then skipping to the end a little bit when we
Mhm.
get that moment between Frodo and Sam at the thing, and it mirrors the exact time between Isildur and the elf guy, right?
Elrond.
Elrond,
Yeah.
and he's like, "Do it," and then he's like, "No," and he takes it. You think Frodo's going to do the exact same thing? In fact, he does.
Mm.
And then it happens to be that he's got to struggle with Smeagol and stuff, and then you get to see Smeagol finally gets what he wants, but he burns to death.
Yeah, and that's also a bittersweet ending too, because his arc is fulfilled. He succeeds in what he gets. He gets the ring. He's the last one to hold it. But at the same time, it comes at the cost of his life. But it's like,
Yeah,
but his life is nothing without the ring. So without the ring, there's no Gollum, and that's like the whole thing. And that's why I love that arc.
exactly.
And we've talked about this arc. We also have to obviously talk about the Aragorn story, which is the
Hmm.
actual king that is returning in this movie.
Whatever happens, stay with me.
This day we fight!
I like that plot line too because in the last episode we talked about Two Towers, how everything did feel separate in order to allow these characters to grow, and you didn't necessarily think that all worked as well, having those separate storylines. Whereas here, I think the
Hmm.
separate storylines do all still relate back to Frodo in this one. Like the war
Hmm.
they're having is as a distraction to weaken Sauron's army, to also kind of
Yeah.
aid as a distraction, which I think works well in this sense. Is that now, yes, we've gone the separate ways. We've done the character development, but now we can bring all of it back to Frodo while still being in separate locations and allowing those characters to still flourish on their own while also having a common goal now and having a common objective, which I also really like. And I like how they kind of merge those stories with Merry and Pippin, bring them back together with Aragorn and Gandalf and Gimli and Legolas, and like kind of just having that kind of be two stories rather than three or four, which I do like. I do like the separate nature of Two Towers. It's still kind of my favorite, but I think in terms of actual story, this maybe does it best. And
Yeah.
that's kind of the best versus favorite, subjective, objective thing, which we never like to talk objectively in this show because it is all subjective. But like, I prefer Two Towers for the reasons that you might not, but also I can
Mhm.
acknowledge that this film maybe does things better than Two Towers in that respect. Like, I think these two films
Yeah.
work very well together, and I enjoy them both.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah. I
good
mean,
film.
Yeah, I totally get that. Like, you can maybe say like, that one maybe does things a little bit stronger, but like my favorite moments are maybe from this one or, something like that. You kind of glean different things. But I also like what you said about the other stories because like I said, my favorite parts are like the Sam Frodo stuff. That relationship, I think, just works the best out of everything in the whole trilogy. But going to Aragon and, Aragorn and seeing him be able to, become king, and become like a really good king, but also to see him be like, we need to be a distraction so that he can go and do this. That was a really cool moment as well. And then another part of my favorite part is because you get to actually see Pippin and Merry be like super useful in these. And one thing that I really kind of dislike throughout the entire trilogy, not Gandalf as a whole, but Gandalf's like treatment of like Pippin. I think he's a jerk to Pippin
And
the
kind of the
entire
hobbits in
thing.
general, in a way. Like he kind of
Kind
looks
of,
because he
yeah.
kind of has those inklings in Hobbit with Bilbo as well, and even a little bit with Frodo. And I think that comes from a weariness of him holding the ring. But I do agree with the Pippin thing, and it could just be the fact that hobbits are underestimated, and I think that's the whole point, and that's what makes that last moment with the "you bow to no one" so amazing.
Oh
Is
yeah.
because those hobbits have been underestimated by people like Gandalf the whole time, and I think you need that like kind of mentor, like, oh, don't do that, you fool of a took, to then
Yeah.
get the cathartic nature of the ending and making it feel like there was an actual journey taken to kind of prove Gandalf wrong. And not saying Gandalf's a dick, but he's a little stern and a little strict,
Sometimes,
and I
yeah.
agree with that. Yeah.
And I just love how we get to see Pippin and Merry just like make certain choices, like Pippin to stay with that one king, and he actually ends up saving Faramir's life. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Saves Faramir's life, even though the other guy doesn't make it. And he's super great and useful. He has a lot. Pippin has so many great moments in this.
Yeah. He gets a
movie.
great arc in this one. Yeah, for sure.
And then Mary, I love Mary just being like, I want to go fight. Like, I don't care if I'm little, I want to go fight. And people are still underestimating him. And then it's only Eowyn, who's also underestimated as a woman, who's like, no, come with me. And then they go, I love that stuff.
Yeah, and I love the whole like no man can strike me down. Well, I am no man, and like that is just
A
so
little,
cool too because
a little
it's a
corny
little
to
on the
me, but
nose,
yeah.
yeah. But it's also you got to think in the lens of 2003. We didn't have any women superheroes at that point. We also
True.
didn't have like the same type of lens on just feminism in film in general, which I actually really like about this too, that feminist angle. The one thing, and this might be like the first lukewarm take of the day, and this is the one reason why I think this show especially is such an interesting experiment, is because I've only seen the extended editions. And when I asked you who is the main antagonist, you said like Sauron / the Ring, and like that makes a lot of sense. But Saruman is such an important part of this trilogy and the Hobbit trilogy. And in this film, he's not in it. And I had to rewind. I'd be like, wait, did I miss his death scene? Because in the extended edition, there is a whole scene where he is taken down. And to me, it just felt like, why would they cut that? And I get this is already a very long movie, but it's like, if you're already going to make a movie this long, you can add the extra 2 or 3 minutes of his death. You can cut his death scene down, but it's like to just have him be an afterthought of Gandalf saying like, well, he's in there, he'll stay there. We've taken care of Saruman. Now let's tackle the next enemy. It's like, that's a disservice, I think, to the story because he's such a big villain that it seems like you want Gandalf to have that moment. B, it's it leads to the ball in the water that Pippin takes that kind of starts this power hungry nature of like him kind of disobeying the rules. It kind of sets up that arc. It just seems a little bit more random in this one because you don't have Saruman dropping that ball into the water. And then third, it's a disservice to Christopher Lee as a talent. Like I love his presence as Saruman, and I feel like when you just cut him and you cut Brad Dourif as well, because they cut both of them in this movie.
I just thought he wasn't in it.
No, the two of them are just completely cut from this movie, and I believe Brad Dourif is also in the extended edition. Let me just check real quick. But like, I really think that is missing for me. Yeah, he is. So they're both in that extended edition, and that scene is so good. And I get it, like they have to cut stuff, but there are other scenes as well, like the Mouth of Sauron, where Sauron, the actual mouth, like speaks to them, like at the
what?
like there's that actual moment where one of the soldiers at the Black Gate like has the Mouth of Sauron.
Know that he suffered greatly at the hands of his host.
it's like just such a cool moment where like you get to hear the villain's voice actually talking, and then of course Saruman's death. There are moments with not Aomer, Eowyn.
Eowyn.
Or sorry, Eomer's Carl Urban's character. Eowyn, a lot of great moments with her after she is on the battlefield when Eomer is consoling her. There's this amazing shot of him like holding his sister, and even that, like in a final movie, and this is kind of what we both agree with Deathly Hallows Part 2. A lot of the great beauty of it is seeing these characters that are not necessarily main forefront characters in the actual story it's telling, but characters we've been with for so long now that like we want closure for them. And I love the moments of closure in that film. And I feel like in this film, like some of those moments, I feel like the editing team was like, well, they're not the main focus, like we can skip over this part. But there's a whole great bonding scene with Eomer and Eowyn after the battle where she's healing, and you start to see a moment with her and Aragorn too, which kind of explains a little bit of why he decides to end up with Liv Tyler's character rather than her, and that little element, which I think is a little bit missed here. And I think looking at the extendeds, I think Fellowship and Two Towers work on their own just fine. This works on its own just fine, but I think those scenes in the extended edition for me make the movie. And so to see it not here, it almost felt like I was getting not a Spark Notes version because it is still so long, but it was like I was longing for those scenes. Some of my favorite scenes in the whole trilogy were not there, and it just felt weird to me. So I was just like, at the time, if I had just seen this version, I would have loved it. But like, having seen the extended edition, I actually think this is probably the worst of the 3 theatrical cuts because I've seen the extended cuts and I've seen just how much more I could love about this movie that's not there. Not to say it's bad at all by any means, and not to say it's not going to be one of the highest ranking things on my list, but it's also like, it's interesting to put in that perspective. And I do think this is a much stronger extended edition than it is a theatrical cut, despite it being longer than all the other cuts. Either way, I think the extra time adds to this and makes it feel even more epic. And I wish they had, kept some of those scenes. But there's only so much you can do with it. But
I mean, that's definitely an interesting take. It's like, some of the things, because when you're like putting something in a theater, people like, well, we don't want, we can't just throw in an intermission and make it 4 hours or make it 3.5 hours. So they're always trying. Why not? I don't know. But studios or whoever's the people who say that's not going to work in the theater, they don't think so. I'm a big proponent of not having Mike Newell direct Goblet of Fire, and I want to see like an Alfonso Cuarón 3-hour Goblet of Fire cut where they have a lot of the stuff like Dobby and things in it. So I totally see. Yeah, from the books. Like I totally see, like yours is different because you actually have an extended cut that you can watch. But I'm also like relating it to something that I wish existed that I said would make that movie feel fuller because it feels so rushed and brief. Because
it's also a lot of people's favorite book, so like that's very telling that it's a lot of people's favorite book and rarely anyone's favorite movie.
Exactly,
I think that says a lot.
And it's like they cut the Quidditch World Cup and stuff like that. So I understand what you mean about like, well, they got most of like the actual central plot lines
like
to
the
close,
key elements are all still there,
But sometimes side things are not just fluff. Sometimes they actually make the world building and stuff feel more fuller and real. And so I totally get where you're coming from with that. But we're judging based on theatrical here. Is that what?
Yeah, I assume. I mean, like, because that's what the Oscars did. And honestly, I still think I would have loved this. Like if I had not seen the extended cut, it's only just having seen the extended cut now. I'm just like, but why? Especially Saruman. That's just the biggest thing because like he's such a prominent villain. I'm like, you can't just put 2 or 3 extra minutes in there just to have his death sequence. Like it just didn't make sense. Like the last movie, Two Towers, they cut all the stuff with Boromir and Faramir's father. He's introduced in this one. He has some Two Towers. And I think that's fine because like you get him in this film and you still get his whole arc. He's going crazy. He's the one who tries to burn his son alive because he's going mentally crazy about losing so much. And it shows like the weight that comes for the king. And that's one of the things you touched on that you loved is Pippin trying to stop that from burning alive because Faramir's not dead. Like I like that stuff. You don't need him in Two Towers to make that stuff work in here.
Sure, I do feel like it does make it feel a little fuller and make a little bit more sense because I was like,
Who's this
Who
guy?
is this
Yeah.
guy? Denethor. I think
Mhm.
he's introduced in Return of the King, right? And has this whole
Yeah,
thing in Return of the King. So
theatrically,
it
yep.
feels because it's a whole trilogy. I feel like introducing like new characters at the end, and then just having them like he doesn't exist beyond when he
Mhm.
dies. So I feel like if you could have had him in the previous movie, it would have made it translate a little bit better. So
Yeah.
I
Well,
can
that's one of the things
see.
one of the things I love about Return of the Jedi, like you mentioned, is that none of the main characters are introduced in the third film. The only introductions are like Jabba and some of like the bigger kind of like supporting side characters. Like all the main characters are still there. Like Lando is introduced in the fifth one, not the sixth.
Yep.
Like I like that. Whereas some trilogies, like you're saying, like introducing them this late, I still think like it's fine as it is. But like, but that even then, like that's a good point of how like the extended may add something to the theatrical and not just be fluff. And
Right.
yeah, I just think it's an interesting conversation. But yeah, we are judging this based on the theatrical cut. So when we do our rankings, I will be factoring in the theatrical cut to that ranking. I don't think it would change that much, but it may at least make it a little bit more of a because if it was the extended cut, I'd be like, yeah, no, it's number one, easy. But this one, at least it caters enough thought because of like, do those omissions really add into my personal viewpoint? And we'll see when we rank them. I'm not going to spoil, but
Yeah.
it definitely weighs in at times. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, just a couple other notes, I guess, there is a big battle in this one. I feel like people talk more about the Helm's Deep one from Two Towers
Mhm.
more than they talk about this one, though. But there are some really fun character moments in that one. And, but the ending, because I was wondering, I was like, what
Which
do I
one?
do with this? do I put this, which one? The one that we got in the theatrical cut. But
No, I know. I'm just saying because there's a lot of different endings. You've got like the Eagles rescuing Sam and Frodo, and then you've got like
the true ending, the last part
of
ending.
Sam with his wife going back into the Hobbit.
Oh no, okay, you're right.
See, that's what I'm talking about.
All
Like,
of
there's so many
that,
different endings.
all
Yeah,
of
I
it.
know
Then.
the
all of it.
whole finale. It was
Once
more.
the-
I was just being cheeky because a lot of people make fun of the fact that there are so many endings, but you have so many different threads to wrap up. So I'm fine with it. You know, you got the ending on Mount Doom, the ending at the Shire, the ending with the king and bowing to the king, like all the different endings. They're all great.
Yeah, I was gonna say everything from when the Eagles pick up Frodo and Sam to the actual credits rolling, I think is all so fantastic and just hits so hard that like it makes up for any of the rest of the movie that I thought might have been a little slow or not worked maybe as good as it works in the extended or whatever. Because I was wondering watching through this, I was like, a lot of this is great, but I like a lot of the other movies on the list. Do I put this one number one? We'll find out. But the strength of that final scene was like, okay, it's getting up there. Like this is just so perfect. Just like the look back from Frodo at Sam and the rest of the hobbits, and he just
that's another ending I didn't even mention.
and he smiles and he's just like. He's telling them like, well, I'm going to like this proverbial like heaven place, but don't be sad and don't feel, sorrow for me because I'm not needed here. This is not where I need to be anymore. And I need to move on. And he just the smile to let them know that, it's your time now, Sam, and I'm going to move on. Just a lot of that stuff just really gets me in the feels, and it's just so well done.
Because as much as like Frodo's the main character, I think Sam is the hero of this franchise. I've always said it. I've loved Samwise Gamgee. Second favorite character next to Chewbacca, but like I really do think like, or maybe Paddington has surpassed them both at this point. But who knows? He's in my top three all time. But like I think. Yeah, like he is the heart and soul of the film because he's the one who carries Frodo. I can't carry the ring, but I can carry you. And then just seeing that he is the last person you see, like he is of all the endings, the last ending is him and Rosie at the Shire. And shout out to Rosie, what an underrated Hobbit. But yeah, I really like all the lines of dialogue, all the emotional moments, and that is why I'm just gonna tease it. Draft day coming up in like the next few weeks is gonna be Lord of the Rings. Chad will be on it, I'll be on it, and we're gonna be talking about the best Hobbit, the best non-Hobbit hero, the best the best villains, the best props, because there are a lot of good and important costume pieces and swords and all that jazz, and the best lines of dialogue, because I think there's so many good lines of dialogue. So maybe I'll save some of my favorites for that draft day, but because we've talked a while about it. But this episode, maybe it'll be as long as the movie, maybe not. But I think it's worth all the discussion because it's a great movie. So
it's hard when you have a film like this that's so epic, won so many awards, and you want to like do the discussion justice, I feel like we have talked a lot about it, but I feel like there's so much we probably still haven't even covered. There's a lot in the movie, but I feel like we've covered a lot of the really great key parts, the arcs, the great character moments and stuff like that. So, you know, hopefully we did it justice, but it, definitely a great film.
Yeah. So Lord of the Rings Return of the King, nominated, of course, for 11. How many does it win? All 11. Best Picture, Best Director for Peter Jackson, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Original Score for Howard Shore, Best Original Song, Into the West, plays over the credits, Best Sound Mixing, Best Art Direction, Best Makeup, Best Costume Design, Best Film Editing, and Best Visual Effects.
Good Lord.
I mean, yeah, like good Lord. The only notable ones, it's not nominated for any acting, not nominated for cinematography, and also not nominated for sound editing. And we'll talk about the film that won sound editing and cinematography later, because I have thoughts on that as well. You know, sometimes it can't be nominated for everything. Sometimes things get lost in translation. Who knows? Lost in translation, Chad. Why don't you tell us about it?
For relaxing time, make it Centauri time.
Make it Centauri time.
Lost in Translation, directed by the great Sofia Coppola, written by Sofia Coppola. Cinematography by Lance Accord. Music by Kevin Shields, Brian Reitzel, and Roger Joseph Manning Jr. Starring not a lot of people: Bill Murray, Scarlett Johansson, Giovanni Ribisi, and Anna Faris. Synopsis: two lost souls, one an actor in there to do whiskey commercials, one regretting her marriage and confused about where her future is going to take her. They meet up and have conversations and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, and the title, Lost in Translation, they're both in a foreign country that they don't necessarily, vibe with, I guess could be the way to say it. They just don't, they're not regulars there, obviously. I mean, tourists everywhere sometimes feel a little bit lost in translation, quite literally, like not knowing necessarily what everything means, how to ask for things, but especially lost because they're also lost in their own lives. And that's the one thing I will say about Lost in Translation that I think Sofia Coppola does so well, is that feeling of the lost souls, of the meandering, of the midlife crisis in Bill Murray's case, but also the I'm so young, why am I jumping into marriage so soon nature of Scarlett Johansson, and setting it in Japan where they kind of feel cut off from reality while also being cut off from their own realities. I think it's a really nice device, and it creates for a very interesting atmosphere and interesting thematic route. Chad, was this a first watch for you, or was this?
This was not a first watch for me.
Me neither.
But
so I'd be curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, but it has been a long time. So I was very interested and excited to revisit this one because I remember liking it. I like Bill Murray and ScarJo a lot. I forgot Giovanni Ribisi was in it, and Anna Faris, and I was like, my God, she is so young in that movie.
Yeah. So is ScarJo. Like, it's just the youngest ScarJo. I think this was her first big thing. Like, I think I don't know if she was just turned 18 or 19 when this.
She was in movie. Ghost World. Was that around the same time?
Maybe.
Wait, no, she was in. She was in like a Home Alone movie.
Ghost World was 2001,
but
so
that's
she had
not
been
a big
acting.
thing.
But like, this is her first like big break in terms of like awards focus too. But she was young here. She was born in I don't want to give out her age. Well, why not? It's public. 1984. So I don't know how old that makes her in this. So she was 19 when this movie came out.
Yes, she was. Yeah.
So she was probably 17 or 18 when this was filmed. Which is also important to know because she is so young and Bill Murray is much older in this film, which is great. It's a big talking point for the film. Because of their age gap, but it is legal, but it is an age gap nonetheless.
Yeah. Very big age gap and very kind of like consistent with their characters. She's about that age as the character. So it's great that it's not someone older pretending to be younger. So it's very kind of realistic. And that's what I love about this movie. Like you said, it's the story, the characters feel like they're kind of aimless and wandering, and I feel like that's kind of sometimes how the movie feels, where it's just like, long just kind of takes of people just kind of sitting around at times and just thinking about things and just trying to figure out what the heck to do. Like, you're lost in translation, you don't know the language, so it's hard to get around, especially you don't want to run around by yourself, get literally lost or whatever, so just finding someone to connect to. This movie reminds me of a recent movie that came out called Come On, Come On. I know you like that
I
movie,
love that movie. Yeah.
which is interesting because after I thought about it, Come On doesn't really super work for me a lot. I feel like it's trying to be like something like Lost in Translation. Maybe I need to revisit it and see, but I just remember like in that movie, because we're not going to get to that. It wasn't nominated, right?
No, unfortunately.
But there's like one scene in that movie, not to super transition to something else, but where it's Joaquin and he's like, get all that rage out, just scream, and I'm like, I've seen this so many times in so many movies, like.
Yeah.
Is there something nuanced here that I'm not saying? Probably. I need to rewatch.
Yeah.
But
well, also you got to think about age also, because that one's dealing more with like a child and an older man trying to connect to a child figure, whereas this is more romantic based because it's like an older man and a younger woman. But I do agree with the fact that like it's about trying to find yourself, and that's what a lot of films are about in certain ways. Even Lord of the Rings to an extent is about characters trying to find themselves, particularly with the hobbits and what they have to rise to the occasion to do and all that. So like I see those parallels for sure, and I think because of the indie nature of it, a film like Come On, Come On does feel similar to this for sure.
Yeah, I mean that's just like kind of like the connection that I made in my head, where I was like just trying to figure out why one film works more than others. But like Lost in Translation, what I'm getting to is I really love actually Lost in Translation quite a bit, just because a movie works so well for me if I love the relationship, and I feel like the relationship between these two. It's another comparison is a more problematic movie is Licorice Pizza that I loved, that we've already talked about. But these kind of relationships that are the age gap is so wide that it feels weird, but then like the connection that they make, you can see that like, age can be just a number sometimes. And it's not even the fact that this is a romance. Like it's kind of a romance, but it's kind of also not. It's a little bit like guardian, fatherly, daughterly sometimes, where it's
honestly, I wish it was just that. Like I think it's the pivot to the end with the kiss. The kiss is supposed to be awkward, and it is awkward in the elevator, and then it becomes a little less awkward at the end. Like it's supposed to be awkward for a reason. But I always said, like when I first watched this, I was like, I wish they just hadn't made it romantic at all. I wish it had just been about like this connection of friends, because I don't think everything needs to be romantic. I think watching this again though, like I was a little bit more forgiving of it because of what you said, because it makes sense for these two characters at this time and place to feel that connection to the point where maybe it isn't romantic, but in their eyes, because no one else has seen them that way, it becomes romantic to them, even though on the surface it's really not, and it's not meant to last. And who even knows if it's meant to last, because that whisper is iconically in cinema as like a, who knows what he says to her.
Exactly.
And some people have said they've been able to like use the sound equipment to decipher what he says, and like it's like maybe, but like even then, like only Bill and Scarlett, even only them know. Even Sophia
Coppola.
Maybe not. Maybe he could. Here's the thing. She knows what's on the page, but he may have whispered something else. Who knows? And that's like one of the long lost cinematic secrets. The reason why, and I don't want to tip my cap again, but the reason why I don't like this movie is because I think the stuff it captures with the more meanderingness and the lost souls coming together, I think that works. What doesn't work for me is, and I think this is just something that's going to be seen as movies get older, as we're in a more progressive light, the use of the Japanese culture. And I know it's trying to emphasize the fact that he is quite literally trapped and lost, and he doesn't connect with these people. But I think to a point, the film makes it a little bit cringy in the sense in what they do with the Japanese characters in this film to make them so different than Bill Murray. It sometimes comes across, the stereotypes become a little bit more pronounced. Just some of the jokes he makes. Bill Murray is playing an asshole in this film, and to a degree, there's something nice about that in the fact that like you can look at a different type of person. He's not the perfect individual, but when he's your main focus, I find it a little harder to connect to him when he's making fun of the Japanese accents and like kind of making fun of the way they speak.
Lip them.
What?
Hey, lip my fucking.
Lip them? What?
And sometimes it's innocent. Sometimes it's like he's just really struggling to connect. But at times it feels like it's for a cheap joke. And Bill Murray is so great at the sarcastic, dry humor, but I feel like this film, Sofia Coppola is going for something a lot more dramatic, but having Bill Murray in that role, he his natural tendency is to make things a little bit more comedic. And to me, that read as being a little bit insensitive toward the culture at times, which I know is probably not the intention, especially in 2003. It's definitely not the intention, or that's at least the comedy that was a little bit more, digestible at the time. But for me, the racial stereotypes really came into play for me. Like I was a little uncomfortable watching all of this because I think the Japanese characters, like we don't get to know any of them very well. And I think that's another thing too, is yes, I get that's kind of the point, is you're supposed to feel the divide, but like when there's so much Japanese influence in this film and we barely get to know any of them by name, and they all just kind of seem like caricatures and stereotypes, at least to me, that's again my lens watching it as someone who didn't necessarily see all these older, more mature movies at the time they were coming out, so I can't necessarily speak on perspective. It's just my own perspective at this time in my life. It just came across a little cringy for me, because I think Bill Murray is such a good comedian, but at times the comedy for me, it didn't work because it was at the expense of the Japanese characters, if that makes sense. And I'm not trying to say if you like the film you shouldn't, you should feel that way. Like that's just my own perspective of what I noticed this time. I was worried going into this that I'd be put off by the age gap, but it was less of that. It was more of me being put off by the Japanese depictions rather than the age gap, where I could actually kind of actually understand the age gap this time. And maybe the next time I watch it a third time, because this was only my second watch, maybe I will start to understand the use of the racial stereotypes. Maybe it does inform the piece, but for me, it was enough of a distraction to take me out of it. And that's kind of like my other lukewarm take of the day, maybe. But yeah, for those reasons, I don't find this as enjoyable as some other people. So
Interesting. Yeah. No, I mean, I didn't know that's where you're going to go, but like when you were talking about it, I did remember some things. Like I remember like one joke in particular. I don't remember the exact joke, but I was like, oh, okay. But then I remember there was one at the very beginning, which is a very common trope, is are you sure that's all he said? Kind of a deal. But I actually like that part because just Bill Murray's delivery for me just kind of always tends to work. So he's able to take that kind of tired joke and make it like, Japanese people might take a long time to say something because I don't have, and I think it might be just a little bit exaggerated to play into that lost in translation. And I'm not at all saying that you're wrong for how you feel, because I get where you're coming from. For me, it didn't bother me as much. So I think that's why I like the movie like quite a bit more. But also it's just, because I was able to kind of tune a lot of that stuff out, because I don't think it was overabundant, at least in my eyes, that the relationship itself was the stuff that actually really worked for me. So that's it. And there's a lot of like the cinematography and just like the things that Sophia chose to focus on, like in the hotel room, and she's hanging up that little thing, and just some of the shots. I'm like, I could see like a Criterion release with all this artwork on the.
I honestly thought it was Criterion. It was surprised when I looked it up and it wasn't. And I will say along that point, I think what she does directorially is really strong, especially this being such an early work of hers. I think she's gotten better as a writer though, and I like that she has progressed as a writer. I think she's been able to kind of like fine tune some stuff to where like even aside from the stereotypes, I think the meandering nature gets a little tired at times. Like I feel like sometimes it's like, okay, but what's the point? And I get what the point is, but it's also like, it could be a little bit more entertaining in bits and pieces, especially in the middle when they're kind of just living. But that's also the beauty of it. And some people love that kind of movie. And I honestly do usually like that kind of movie, which is why I'm surprised that this didn't connect to me as much this time around.
It's interesting how, you have certain different pacings, and like sometimes a pacing can be like so off that, it doesn't work for really anybody. But like sometimes, a certain sort of pacing, but also it's not just the pacing, it's the content and like, how much do you like the characters and the relationship and the things that are going on in the pacing that is working for you, not working for you. And I think for you, it might not work as well. For me, I was fine with living in that world because I felt really lost in my life, just like they have. Just wondering what's next. Like, when I had like kind of a career, downturn for a second where I was just like, what's next? What do I do? If the next career thing, I know you probably are already
Yeah,
starting to have stuff like that. Where
yeah,
what's the next thing?
and I think that's a great point you bring up is just our age gap. It's not huge, but it's at the point where you've obviously lived a lot longer and have been able to like kind of have more of those adult experiences where I'm fresh out of college a few years. Like I still am kind of going through that. And I think maybe in 10 years, this film will relate more to me and I'll be able to kind of see it for what it is. And I do see it for what it is. It's just like some of the things kind of blind that to me.
Yeah.
Whereas I do think thematically though, like I think what she's trying to get across is well done. Like I think this is a better movie than it is a movie I like, and I think that's the subjective
Okay.
objective thing. Like I think it's a better made movie than I'm giving it credit for, but it just like I don't find as much enjoyment in it. And that's interesting because it is such a revered classic. Like it's considered a modern classic by so many people. So I know I'm in the minority with that. And I know a lot of people are going to be seeing this and be like, "Whoa, he doesn't like this movie." But I think that's the beauty of movies too, is that it can connect to different people at different times in their lives. Like you said, like you were at a point in your life where you needed this film more than I did, and I think that could speak a lot to just enjoyment in general with every film.
Absolutely. And just that you talking about like the at different points that we watch this film in our lives is just so interesting because you're closer to ScarJo in the movie than I am. I'm closer. Well, I don't want to say I'm closer to Bill
No,
Murray. I'm
You're
early in my
not that old.
30s, but that's an interesting thing is you can watch this movie when you're closer to ScarJo's age and then watch it again when you're like closer to Bill Murray's age and like totally be like, yeah, I understand everything Bill Murray's saying right now. All that's true. Marriage is weird. Kids are kind of like, they'll destroy your life, but they're also the best thing that you've ever done if you have kids.
It's like pick out the color of this rug and it's like they're all the same color. It's like,
which one's burgundy? Like,
yeah. So I definitely get that. Yeah.
And then also to touch on, because I didn't really respond to the whole kiss thing because it's an interesting thing, like how we perceive relationships and romance and like things like kisses and stuff like that. And obviously, all consensual, everything like that. They had this like deep relationship, and I kind of love. I think the reason why I love a relationship like this because it's so bittersweet. Like it pains me so much to see them have to apart because I know that they just really cared for each other, not necessarily in a huge romantic way. They didn't have sex. They didn't do any of this other stuff, but like, it's just two people connecting. And for me, that's not always necessarily romance. And I'm not saying they're necessarily either father and daughter. Like it was kind of somewhere in between. So like the kiss for me is like, I care for you. You're special. It didn't feel like cheating. I mean, because he actually does cheat in the movie.
True.
But
I didn't think of that. Yeah.
But them connecting in that way, and just it also reminds me of another film that I love, and I know you probably love too, Before Sunrise.
Oh my God, yeah.
And that's another one that I don't want to like ruin this movie, but like where it's a relationship that takes place over like the course of like one afternoon or day. And this is another one where they part at the end. And this is another thing with Lost in Translation. And those ones that are like brief moment, and that one's an actual romance. Mm-hmm. But this one, like just these connections that people make over a very short period of time, but it's so meaningful to each other. And then they have to part. It's just, I don't know. I was invested in their relationship, and just to see them have to part, I'm like, just stay in Japan together forever. Like,
it's heartbreaking. There's a really great bittersweetness. Yeah. So,
so well
so you could say Chad was right on its wavelength. You could say I was lost in translation with this film, but either way, it created a great discussion. And for the Academy, it got some good nominations. It only got 4 nominations, but they were all pretty heavy hitting ones. It wins 1 of the 4. It wins Best Original Screenplay for Sofia Coppola, and I don't believe she was nominated since, unfortunately. And it was also nominated, of course, for Best Picture, for Best Director for Sofia Coppola, a rare woman directing nom, which we didn't see a lot of at the time, and actor for Bill Murray. Again, a thing we don't see a lot of at the, comedic actors getting nominated for dramatic works. Adam Sandler, Jim Carrey have never been nominated for Oscars. So Bill Murray was able to do what those 2 other actors were not. And I kind of
Robin Williams,
2 actors, but hey, Robin Williams did win though. For what should we call it? Good Will Hunting.
So he's fantastic in that movie.
Yeah. Well, Jim Carrey is fantastic in Truman Show's Eternal Sunshine.
Adam Sandler's
Uncut Gems, but nonetheless, the Academy said no. Maybe they'll say yes to Hustle. I don't think they will. But yes, Yeah, these comedic masters. They can master the craft. They can command the screen, but they can't get those nominations. But you know what can master a ship, and you know what can command a ship is Russell Crowe. So let's talk about Master and Commander, The Far Side of the World. That might have been my best segue yet.
The great one. Bravo.
Thank you. Thank you.
Master and Commander, The Far Side of the World, directed by Truman Show's Peter Weir.
Another great segue. I didn't even realize I made.
By Peter Weir and John Coley. You did, that's true. Cinematography by Russell Boyd. Music by Ian Davies, Christopher Gordon, and Richard Tognetti. Starring, I don't have a lot of people here. Russell Crowe, Paul Bettany, and Billy Boyd is also in this for
Yes, he is.
a little bit.
He's in there. He's on the crew.
Based on Master and Commander by Patrick O'Brien, and synopsis, it's like a bunch of people on a British ship. It's like the beginning of kind of like naval warfare, and they are dominated by a French vessel, and then they have to come up with how to turn that around and defeat
down
the
this
French
ship.
vessel.
Yeah, it's like the Moby Dick thing of like, that's our white whale. We're trying to get it the whole time. And the great thing about this is we never see that conclusion. And I think the beauty in this film is that it's not about the chase. It's not about that. It's about the human character arcs, and it's about the in Paul Bettany's case, the love of nature and exploring new worlds and what exploration means. And I think it's a great just depiction of sea life in general. Like, you look at authenticity, you look at this, and I think it's great that this came out the same year as Pirates of the Caribbean, because both great movies, but one is very much more the Disney-fied, Hollywood-fied. I don't think those are words, but the Hollywood, like, swashbuckling, like, pirates are fun and we have fun. And this one, it's like, yeah, we have our own hobbies and interests, but this life fucking sucks, because it does. And the conditions on the ship are brutal. I mean, this kid gets his arm amputated within 20 minutes. Paul Bettany has to do surgery on himself to remove a bullet.
He pulls a house MD on himself.
While he has the mirror. Like, this is some of the stuff I've never even thought about pirates and swashbuckling, yo-ho, yo-ho. But I think that's what makes this such an impactful watch, is just how grounded and just raw, just brutality that this is. And that's what I think you can tell by my smile, and I think you share the sentiment. Like, I really love this film. Like, this movie is damn good. But I haven't let you speak on it, so I'll let you talk on it. I have a lot more to say, but like, Chad, take it away, because was this a first watch for you?
This was definitely a first watch.
Yeah, for me as well. So I'd be curious to hear.
Yeah, no, this is one that I've heard so many people just kind of casually be like, Master and Commander, really great movie. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I just kind of like heard that so many times throughout since it came out. And then now finally getting around to checking this out, having a good reason to, other than it being a great movie, was amazing, because I finally understood. Like, first starting out, I'm like, oh, it's about vessels in a store. It's like a wartime thing.
It's not a good sell. Like, it's not my type of movie on paper, which is why I think I'm that much more surprised,
Yeah, and then like going in and seeing exactly what you said, that this is just more about the characters, and they're confined to the ship, so you get to see their struggles, like you said, but also their brilliant ideas and successes, and their sense of discovery and wonder, like with the Galapagos, and just wondering, if the one thing can go on the land or whatever, and it's like, these things actually go. Was it the turtles?
I don't remember. Yeah, because there's a lot of wildlife brought up. Yeah,
but it's one of the creatures that I thought it was Jude Law for a long time, but it's Paul Bettany. Paul Bettany was like, no, this one creature doesn't go on the land or something like that. One of the kids is like, this one does. And he's like, what? And so he goes on the land and goes, son of a bitch, it does. And it's just like to see his sense of discovery. And he's like trying to get Russell Crowe as the commander to let him go on the islands and explore and stuff. And it's kind of like a promise he had to him. And then he's like, no, but we have to go get that ship. And then you see that his love for the creatures on the island gives them the idea of how to conquer that ship. which I
Well,
thought
because
was
they
so
think they've
brilliant.
lost sight of the ship. They think they
Yeah.
lost it, so they're like, "All right, well, we're gonna give up on this and just go to the island because that's what the promise." And then he comes over this other heap of the island and he sees the ship and he's like, "Holy shit, that's the one! I gotta go tell Cap." And I like that how you're able to see both these characters kind of get what they want, but also like kind of give each other what they want because there's a real camaraderie, and we see this in the music that they play together. Like there's a real, I hate to say it, but a musical harmony between the two, and that's what makes them so compatible. And I like that this is their second team up since A Beautiful Mind, Russell Crowe and Paul
Oh,
Bettany,
right.
in 3 years. But I like the camaraderie and the friendship there because it's not a lot of time spent on the two of them, but you can see that there's a mutual respect. Because usually you get in movies like this, I'm the captain, I'm far and above the rest, but in this sense, it's like, no, you're our doctor. Like,
Yeah.
we have no one to operate on you when you get when you get shot, bulleted. What am I saying? But like when you get shot, like we have no one to take care of you because you're the guy that takes care of everyone else. So much so that he has to perform surgery on himself. And I think that just shows that like you could have multiple people captain the ship. You can't have multiple people take bullets out of people. And I think there's that respect that Russell Crowe finds with Paul Bettany's character of like, no, like you're the only guy who can save our lives. So, like you're the most vital piece of the puzzle. So much so that like I'm willing to let you go explore the Galapagos if it means, like showing my respect to you and adoration. I really like that bond and that relationship. Yeah.
Same. And but not only just like him seeing the ship, but apparently like he found like something that one of the creatures does to like kind of disguise itself. That's what they decided to do, was like strip down their ship or something, pretend to be a different kind of vessel so that they're not attacked. They're just kind of maybe boarded, and then they can kind of have the upper hand, like surprise, like in Zoolander, surprise. And then and then so they do that, and then like what is it? They find out that it was like wasn't it like a whole thing where they disguised the captain as not the captain, and so he thought the captain was dead.
The enemy ship, like the doctor or whatever, it was like said that the doctor lied to them. It was like, oh, the captain's dead. Like I did a whole autopsy and everything. Like I examined his body, he's gone. And they're like, all right, and they kind of like let him get away, only to realize like, oh, plot twist, that was not the doctor. And it's like, oh, what? That was not the doctor, or the doctor died. The real doctor died, so that couldn't have been the real doctor. So that guy was just fibbing, and that's how they end the film. It's like, oh, let's go back and get them. And I like how that's where they end it, because then it's like it shows that this is an ongoing thing, because that's life. It's just like it's always on to the next thing. And even though it's the same ship they're after, it's like, oh nope, back onto the seven seas. And we don't necessarily see that last chapter, but we don't need to, because it very well could continue on forever. We don't know. And that's kind of the beauty, but also the sadness of the story, is that it's ongoing. It's a revolving door.
I love what you just said. And also I remember when that guy was saying, oh, the captain's dead. I was like, there's no way the captain just died. Like, that's not how this ends. And then like, is that guy the captain? I think
I was gonna say you got to be on a ship, because you obviously had better intuition than Russell Crowe did.
Apparently he was like, oh, okay. Yeah. And then, oh, here's the sword. All right, cool. And but no, it's weird because like, I have kind of like a love-hate relationship with Russell Crowe a lot of the times. Like sometimes I find him just fine. Sometimes I find him not that great. And sometimes I find him brilliant. I loved him in this movie.
Well then, there's not a moment to lose.
One thing that I really love in like films and stuff too, just like you were saying, is like when you show great leadership, or you show really terrible leadership, but in a satirical kind of way, like The Thin Red Line did.
Or like Pirates of the Caribbean.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, Captain Jack is, take him or leave him,
but. But I love how this commander, like you said, shows like so much camaraderie with the people that are on board the ship. He doesn't act like holier than thou, like above. Like he may be like chain in command at the top, but he's not like, sometimes he has to go like, you're going to do this because we have to get this done or whatever. Sometimes he plays into that, but a lot of other times he's like, how would you handle things? What do you think? And stuff like that. And I love that from leadership, when they're like, they don't have to, because of a chain of command, ask their inferiors. I don't want to say inferiors. That sounds bad. What is the subordinates? What they think. But when they do, I think that's fantastic. It's like a great, not only leader, but teacher. It's like, well, I know some things. I don't know everything, but what do you think? And then maybe other people have really great ideas too, even though you do need like some figurehead to lead the way. But yeah, I love how all of that's handled. All the relations are handled. you get some really, really sad moments in here. Like the one kid that's like so bullied that he like takes the cannonball and just like jumps in the ocean and commits suicide, and he like drowns, and you get to see his just body disappear.
It's like Jack
That
and
is
Titanic.
so creepy. Yes, it is.
And about that storyline, like I think that's a really dark storyline because he's not even bullied because they don't like him necessarily. He's bullied because there's something called the what is it, the Jimmy or the what is it called? The Jonah. The Jonah being this like ancient myth of like the person who brings bad luck to the crew, and they start to see all this bad luck happen that they just assume, oh, you're a Jonah. And it's so sad because they start singing and he continues the verse or whatever, and they're like, oh, he's the odd man out, he's the Jonah. And I don't think it's warranted, the bullying, but it's also like they really believe that shit, the mythic stuff. Like this was before cell phones. Like this is when like this was the rumors, the fake news, if you will. Like he's the Jonah that they like they have to like fear, essentially. Like he's this rotting cancer on their crew that like he himself even starts to believe. And his thing is not that he wants to die, but he thinks it's his duty to the crew to die because he feels like he's a bad luck omen. And that is heartbreaking. That is so tragic because that's real shit you hear on these ship stories. And I like that, like, this is every single area of the ship you could cover. It covers all the different ranks, all the different experiences. And you mentioned this is based on the book Master and Commander by Patrick O'Brien, but Patrick O'Brien actually made 20 novels documenting his, I don't even think they're fiction, documenting his times on the sea. So this is the most authentic reporting of this type of life you get. And it's kind of a culmination of all these different books. It's not just the Master and Commander book. I believe another book is called The Far Side of the World. So they just kind of combined the two in the title. But it's the series of books that he wrote about just his adventures at sea. And sometimes they're not the most like exciting on paper. Like we said, like this type of movie wouldn't necessarily appeal to me normally if I just read the synopsis. But I think it's in the just how authentic it is in presentation that makes it so gripping and so exciting and so at times heartbreaking, like the story with the Jonah, and just the idea of like how would we have even known that that was a thing unless we got it from this firsthand source of Patrick O'Brien's novels. Like the fact that this was a thing, the whole Jonah thing, like I had no idea that existed. And that's the stuff we don't see in the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, which I love, but it's like, you know, that kind of glorifies, or not glorifies, romanticizes a bit the pirate's life. And like, it's kind of fun to be a pirate, but in actuality, as we see here, it's not. It's fun at times. There are connections you make that are worthwhile. Like you get to, you know, do your hobbies, like we said, with like Paul Bettany's character, but it's like, and most of the time it's brutal. You know, you have the kid basically telling the other kid about how when they do the body bags or whatever, they put like a stitch through the nose to make sure they're dead or whatever. And he says, don't let that happen to me. And at the end, when the kid is dead, he's like, can I do it? Can you teach me how to do it? Because he wants to fulfill his friend's wish. And that stuff is so heartbreaking. And that's what I love about this film is it's all the ins and outs, the positives and negatives, the ins, the outs, all the ins and all the in-betweens, all that too. So
and like you're saying, the things in the beginning connect to the things at the end. And, you know, it's just great movies like that really do that. I just love like how it's, you know, everything's based on the characters. It just really helps you focus on like what's going on a lot of the times. And you really start to care about these characters. And like you said, kid who committed suicide, you know, I forgot like all the ins and outs of that story. And like
it could be its own movie on its own, you know, like it's that prominent.
Just like early, you know, we got like what cyberbullying and stuff these days, but then it was Jonah bullying, and it was like, you know, just like this thing, like you said, that made me crack up when you said they really believe that shit. And I'm like, well, some people still believe in like superstitions and stuff. But
yeah, I mean, like, it's the early onset of it, but yeah, to a more extreme degree. But I agree, yeah.
And then you like, well, some things actually do happen, but like when you go into the Vivitch movie and stuff, and you see what people believe and stuff like that from a time gone by, you know, this one, what, 1800s or something like that? I don't know what the time it is, but I don't know. Yeah, no, this is definitely a great movie. I'm glad that I saw this one. I was going into it, like you were saying, on paper, like, all right, let's get this one over with. This is another like war thing that people say is good and okay, but I don't love a war film unless it connects with me in some way. And this one just definitely did. And I was like, whoa, okay. Yeah. This is interesting. I like this one.
Yeah, and even the authenticity of the ship itself. We haven't even talked about the design. Like, I love how the ship is designed. Like, the opening shot of all the shadows and the way the camera is always consistently moving. Not to the point where you get seasick, but like to the point to at least evoke the feeling of always being like this on the ship. Like if you look at the movie again and you go back, the camera's always doing this, and I love that. And
I didn't notice.
I was talking about earlier how Lord of the Rings, the only two it wasn't nominated for were cinematography and sound editing, because guess who won that one? This film. And I'm almost wondering if they didn't even nominate Lord of the Rings because they wanted to give Master and Commander something, and they were like, well, let's just nominate it here, and let's, we don't need to nominate Lord of the Rings in cinematography because it's so much visual effects anyway. Like, let's give this cinematography because I think this is very warranted. And I wonder, in a year where Lord of the Rings doesn't come out, I wonder how many more awards this wins, because it only wins those two, because I think it loses everything else to Lord of the Rings. I'm wondering, like, if Lord of the Rings is not in the picture, I think it picks up production design. I think it picks up makeup. I think it picks up costumes. I think it picks up the editing. Like, I really do think it picks up so many other categories because it is such a great technical achievement. It's just Lord of the Rings is also a technical achievement, and it was like the culmination of so many other films that aided in it. But it almost sucks that this came out the same year, because this is a technical juggernaut right up there with Lord of the Rings, with Mad Max Fury Road, with all those films that have won so many technical awards. And I wish it had its own year to shine and win all those technicals. But so
great movie.
Yeah, as for the awards it doesn't win, obviously it's nominated for sound editing and cinematography, wins both those awards. It is nominated for picture, director for Peter Weir, sound mixing, art direction, makeup, costume design, film editing, and visual effects. Loses all 8 of those awards to Lord of the Rings, but just a really stacked year for technical achievements. Going from the 7 seas, let's head to a different body of water. Why don't we go to the Mystic River? Chad, why don't you tell us about Mystic River?
The River of the Mystic Variety, yes. Mystic River, directed by Clint Eastwood. Written by Brian Helgeland. Cinematography by Tom Stern. Music by Clint Eastwood. Starring Sean Penn, Tim Robbins, Kevin Bacon, Lawrence or Larry Fishburne, Marcia Gay Harden, Emmy Rossum, and Laura Linney. Based on Mystic River by Dennis Lehane. And synopsis. Okay. A boy gets kidnapped at the very beginning. It affects the rest of his life. And then later in his life, when he's an adult, a girl gets murdered, and it is the daughter of that character's best friend, or once best friend, growing up. And there's a
who
lot
also
of
now
mystery.
happens to be a brother-in-law, I guess, or they're cousins. Marcia Gay Harden and Laura Linney are cousins.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's correct.
So, so there's a little bit of a familiar relationship, but yeah, it's about like essentially trauma to an extent, but also kind of like a murder mystery, kind of like a suspense whodunit. I hate to put it in that way because it's such a heavy, dramatic film. I hate to say like it's a whodunit.
It's not Knives Out, yeah.
but like they're trying to figure out the murderer for a lot of it, and the detective is also one of the trio of friends, which I think also creates an interesting dynamic. You've seen this plenty of times, I'm sure, right? Like I feel like you've always brought up Mystic River, like either you're doing it for debate or for some other reason. But this was the first watch for me, so I'm interested to see how we both feel about it, because Clint Eastwood, I'll put it this way, has never really clicked with me as a director. Just some of his works, and I've seen most of his newer works, like Sully, American, what is it, Sniper. Some of those films, like I like them, but I'm not like, I'm not like, oh my god, his direction. So I was a little weary going into this, I'll admit. But spoiler alert, I very much enjoyed it. I think it's very, very well done. It's very well made, very well written, very well acted. I mean, geez.
Oh yeah.
And we'll get there. But I really think this is probably my favorite of his works I've seen, which is great because I went into this being like, Clint Eastwood, sorry, bud, we just don't see eye to eye. I'm even of the minority that doesn't really love Unforgiven as much as others. But again, I need to rewatch it because it's been a while. But yeah, as a Clint Eastwood, not hater, but as someone who's never seen eye to eye, I was definitely surprised that I like this as much as I did. But I'd love to hear your thoughts as someone who has seen it many times, because then we can segue into some actual discussion, because there's a lot to talk about, because this is a very heavy film, very dense.
Yes. Heavy film, long film. I knew some of your takes on like Unforgiven and things, and we'll get there. Trust me, we'll get there one day. I mean, Clint Eastwood, if we're just talking about actually his direction in general, obviously very classic Western star and stuff like that. But transitioning into directing, there's actually, I haven't seen a lot of his films. I've maybe seen a third of his films, but a lot of like newer ones. There's some I adore that we'll get to, like $1 Million Baby,
which I also, disclaimer, have not seen, so that has not weighed in
Okay.
on my dislike for him as a director. So.
Gotcha. But I'm right on the wavelength of like American Sniper. I thought the movie was fine. And then like, other movies that I really enjoy, but I'm not saying are some of the greatest movies in the world, like Gran Torino. I also do really like Unforgiven though. And I am interested to revisit that one to see if I liked it as much as I did before.
Yeah.
But this one I've seen many times. The wacky whodunit, Mystic River. No, it's not. No, I'm just kidding. But no, this is
it was this kid.
Oh yeah, spoiler alert.
Oh yeah,
we'll get there in a second.
I hope I was vague enough when I said this kid, but like, if you don't want to be spoiled, don't watch this next like maybe 10 minutes, because we're going to be. I think you have to talk about spoilers when you talk about this, because I think a lot of my thoughts on the film, a lot of it kind of culminate in the ending, which I will talk about. Which honestly, I don't want to get there yet, but like, it was very divisive from what I saw online. So we'll definitely talk about it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Spoiler warning. There you go.
Spoiler warning. Pause. Come back later. Go watch Mystic River. It's fantastic. Come back later.
Go watch it.
I love Mystic River. That's why I'm able to have seen it so many times. But I will say it is a very, very hard watch. It is heavy.
It doesn't hold back. Yeah.
A lot of the themes about trauma, just childhood trauma that just lives with you the rest of your life and never goes away. And not only does it affect just you, but it affects everyone around you. And I feel like that's one of the biggest strengths. And we'll get to that ending. That ending is very hard to watch. And I can see why that ending would be very divisive. There's so much of the ending that makes me sad, but also extremely angry. So I understand. But going before that, I love a lot of the like what he does specifically with Clint's direction in this. Just the visuals that they have, like the visual connections of them existing as children and then existing as adults. And they're not as close as they were when they were kids.
No.
We don't get a lot of time with them as kids. It's just like one or two scenes at the very beginning showing David getting abducted by cops, or not cops, but
Fake
posing
cops.
as cops.
Fops. Yeah.
Sure. And just seeing that, and you just hear stories about that happen. To see that on screen, I just it's weird because I remember watching this with my wife Carrie for the first time, and as soon as he got in that car, she knew what was up. She was like, "He's dead. He's definitely dead." And then I was like, "No, but he might as well be, because the rest of his life, he gets married.
It's like a part of him died that day for sure.
He has a kid, and I know that some people could criticize this, be like, well, they say the point of the movie later in the movie with some of the lines, like,
it's a little on the nose. Yeah,
when did you last see David? It's like 25 years ago in that car. And I'm like, fuck, but that gives me chills. I'm like, that's true. That was the last time he saw like his best childhood friend was going away, and he was never the same after that. And just the weight of that is so felt by the acting, just the presence of it, the tone of the movie, the color scheme of the movie, just everything is so dark and like, dreary and melancholic. I don't use that word often, so I used it correctly. Okay, good. But I'll let you talk for a little bit.
Well, I was going to say a big central part of it is also that when Sean Penn's daughter is murdered, Tim Robbins ends up becoming not the prime suspect, but a very suspected suspect. Suspect is suspected, whatever, bad choice of words. But you kind of see how this childhood trauma affected this friend group to the point where Sean Penn almost sort of correlates this memory to Tim Robbins' character. Like, it's kind of one of the same. So in essentially kind of at the end, at his breaking point, this is where we're getting into the ending and the resolution of things, when he's finally able to kill Tim Robbins' character, that is not as much him killing this guy as much as it is killing that part of him, that trauma that has lived with him since. And I've seen people complain, and here are the complaints, and I'm going to address them.
Okay.
People have complained about the fact that Kevin Bacon and Sean Penn are then like, yo, we're even more traumatized than he was.
Okay.
And a lot of people are like, how dare they try to compare their traumas? But I think that's the point. I think the whole point is that Sean Penn gets so carried away that he starts to make terrible decisions and essentially ends up being worse than anything he imagined this killer to be. Because at the end, we find out that these killers are really these innocent kids who I don't want to say they don't know better. They obviously know better, but it's these kids that they're kids and they took things out of line, and it's terrible, but there was no actual motive there. And I think that's what makes it so awful, that he wanted to pin it on someone. He wanted to have that answer so badly that it let him go to extreme measures, to where the scene where Kevin Bacon is telling him the truth of who murdered the girl, and he's like, we found the murderers, just the look on Sean Penn's face of, oh shit, like I killed someone, but the lack of remorse because he still killed what was eating him alive, and it was not the murder of his daughter, it was the trauma, and that's what he was killing. And essentially he's like, great, those kids, we found the killer, but also like I still got that catharsis of, you know, kind of like shooting my trauma in the face, and it's horrible. But I think a lot of people have been like, how, and then you have Laura Linney being like, no, you killed him, like you're such a great man, I want to fuck you.
Everyone is weak. Everyone but us. You could rule this town.
The thing is, people have been like, how dare she glorify him? But I think that's the point, is that at the end of the day, Sean Penn and Kevin Bacon, they basically say, let's brush this under the rug. Let's live our lives. Kevin Bacon is at this parade with a great family. Sean Penn has a nice pair of shades. He's like, yo, I'm a cool guy. I'm a cool son, bitch. And meanwhile, you have Marcia Gay Harden walking through this crowd like her whole life has been ruined, because she, you know, kind of fell into this trap of, well, like, let's just go after the common enemy, the common suspect. And you see how that ruined her life, and how essentially Kevin Bacon and Sean Penn get off scot-free. And to the point where Laura Linney's praising her husband when we've seen what her husband did, and what he did was not good. He murdered this innocent man because of all the bent up trauma and just the stress of the situation. I think that's to emphasize the point, because what is the final shot? It's the river. And what's the river? It's this rotting dead body of an innocent man. And I think that is the point of the movie, that obviously you can feel like put off by the fact that Sean Penn and Kevin Bacon get to live happily ever after. But I think that only emphasizes the point, only makes the film stronger, because you have these two guys giving each other this look of like, yep, like you got me, I got you, we're good. Like it's corruption. The fact that a police officer knows the truth, but also knows that Sean Penn murdered an innocent suspect the night before and doesn't do anything about it, because he's like, you know what? We've been through the same traumas. I got you, buddy. We'll let this one slide. And the heartbreak that comes with the fact that you know that this innocent guy is now rotting at the bottom of the river while his wife is aimlessly going through this parade crowd to look for her son, who it looks depressed because he lost his father. And I think that is the point of the movie, that some people immediately want to say, how does this glorify Sean Penn and Kevin Bacon's characters? I don't think it glorifies them. I think it's the opposite. I think it reminds you that what they did was shitty, and what they did was uncalled for. And yes, they were suffering from the same traumas, but it doesn't excuse their behavior. Yet the community is going to love them because no one knows the truth. And that's the hard part of it. And I think that's the beauty of this movie, is that it lets these people get away with it and almost feel like they're heroes at the end of the day, when in actuality, the audience knows the opposite. But I think that's the point, is some people like to think that whatever the movie's saying and the characters are saying, the audience has to respond to and agree with. And I think this is the opposite. I think Clint Eastwood is saying, these are these flawed individuals that let all this consume them, and you're not supposed to necessarily agree with them or be in line with them, because honestly, we're supposed to follow his trauma for most of it. Sean Penn, we're supposed to feel that frustration and that anger, and I agree with that. Like I the stuff of him grieving as a father, that's real, like that we should connect with. But when he takes things into his own hands, that's the point where we have to, as an audience, be like, that's not okay. And I think sometimes people think that the film is glorifying it, which I do not think it is. And that's where I'm like, I hate to say you missed the point, but like, if you were really leaving this film being like, they really wanted me to like love Sean Penn's character at the end, I don't think they were. I think the whole last shot of the river is meant to enforce the fact that Tim Robbins is the one who got the shit end of the stick at the end of the day. That's just
Yeah.
my perception. I don't know if you feel differently because you've seen it a bunch of times also. So like, I'd love you to weigh in on that. But like, what do you think of this ending? Do you think it glorifies these characters? Do you think it's making a statement about them? And do you think like, do you like this? Are you satisfied with the character arcs? Like, how do you feel? I know it's a loaded question. I know it's a loaded question. It's a
It's a
loaded movie.
lot.
Yeah.
It is a loaded movie. Like you're saying, it's kind of dense. There's a lot that happens, but not in a bad way because it's like
Mhm.
it feels like a lot of real characters,
Yeah.
the things that have happened, and there's a lot of weight on them. So you feel like a lot of weight on you, especially like knowing a lot of these terrible things happen because this wasn't the first time Sean Penn killed somebody. He killed another guy and talked about it. And that's how he reveals that to Tim Robbins. And then you're like, oh shit, he is about to kill Tim Robbins because there's no way he'd tell him that unless, you know, he's about to kill
Yeah,
him.
you pick up on that. Yeah.
And then, yeah. And then, so, you know, just it's so, I actually, this time I fast forwarded through that scene because I'm like, you know,
The
when
Tim Robbins death
you
scene or
get-
the abduction?
the death scene of Tim
Yeah,
Robbins
okay,
because when it's such a great performance, but like when he's Sean Penn gets him to lie and say that, you know, he did do it just because that's what he wanted to hear. This
Because
is
he
the
wanted
type
to
of
survive. His
this
life
is
was
the-
on the line. He thought that's what could get him out of it, but it didn't.
exactly. And this is the type of things that you hear stories about police doing is getting people to lie about their actual innocence or guilt just because they're like, please get me out of this room. I don't want to. And so, yeah, so his life was on the line. He had to lie for it. I don't know. This is one I'm still trying to figure out. I think you hit a lot of it really just on your first watch too. You hit a lot of this like really well because I think that does make sense. I can see where those other people are coming from.
Yeah.
And I don't want to say like they missed the point. Like you said, you didn't want to say that either.
Yeah.
Because people watch it in a different way and they feel different things. This is one where you can feel differently on the ending. You can feel like maybe they are glorifying that, or no, maybe they're just making a like a satirical kind of like point about the way things are. Like this is how that probably would have happened. There is corruption,
Especially in
that
regards to
exists.
police, because Kevin Bacon is a police officer. I mean, I don't think it's any. I hate to say it, I don't think it's any coincidence that Lawrence Fishburne's character's name is Whitey Powers. And this isn't obviously a film about race, but it is about the people who are innocent being treated unfairly, and like immediately like, you know, kind of mob mentality of like, oh, let's all just get this one guy, to the point where Marcia Gay Harden's character turns on her own husband out of fear, but that fear is instilled by Sean Penn. That fear is not necessarily her husband's. And he does hold back some information, but it's also because he did murder someone and he just doesn't feel right saying it. But you find out the
doesn't want to
motives
get caught either.
in what he did. Actually, he was killing someone who was a predator. But at the same time, you know, if he admits he murdered someone, he goes to jail. But then at the end, you find out that, like, honestly, if he had just admitted who he killed and what he did, he probably would have been free of all this other shit. So it's sad.
Well, I mean, he still would have went to jail probably.
Right, but like, but he wouldn't have been murdered at the hands of Sean Penn for his daughter, because he wouldn't have even been a suspect if he had just owned up to the other things. So
that's
a big circle, which sucks. It's all unfortunate. You know?
Yeah. One thing I did actually want to bring up was a scene that I noticed this time with that I thought was really important with the Kevin Bacon, Larry Fishburne, and Tim Robbins all in the when they were interrogating him, and he keeps asking for the Sprite. He's like, "Can you give me a Sprite, please? I just want a Sprite." And they're like, "No, we're not gonna get you a Sprite." And then he appeals to like his friend Kevin Bacon and is like, you know, "Can you give me that Sprite, please?" And then he goes to do it, and then he's like, "Yeah, but I'll go get you a Sprite." And then he's like, "So you're the good cop, huh?" And stuff like that. And then he goes, "No, what? I'm not going to get the Sprite. Why don't you tell us the thing?" And then he kind of hardens a little bit. I'm like, maybe that is kind of showing the side of him that can close off and be that cop that could be corrupt. You know, and like it's such a hard thing though, because he does seem like a genuine guy, like a good guy. He's not like Sean Penn's character, who Sean Penn does not seem like a good guy, and he's not. But you know, you can see where he's coming from, and then he even does show remorse. So then maybe even Laura Linney's the worst character of the movie, because she's the one that wants to cover everything up, and it's like, you did a good job. Fuck that guy. I know he was innocent, but fuck him. I don't care. And I'm like,
that ending scene, honestly, and she's not my pick for best actress, but in that one scene, like that is like
Yeah.
her character in Ozark. It's like that is the great prototype of like, wow, like she, even her wheels are turning,
The
and that's what I
villain
like
of the
about this film.
story.
It's very very deep. But yeah, like it's a very heavy film. Honestly, I think it's a little heavy-handed at times, and I think part of that is because Tim Robbins and Kevin Bacon to me are playing like characters, whereas I think Sean Penn, as great as he is, and he wins the Oscar
Yeah.
for this, I think he's almost acting to the point where it's very obvious it's Sean Penn acting and not Sean Penn as this character, to where it's a little extreme at times. And I'm not saying a father in this scenario would be as grieving as he is, like because he screams, he cries.
Send my daughter in there! Oh, God!
But at times it gets a little bit much to where I'm like, okay, he's going for that Oscar rather than like Tim Robbins, who is living as this character, who I feel like is play. Like I feel like I'm watching Dave Boyle, not Tim Robbins. Whereas here I'm like, I'm watching Sean Penn, and he's great. I don't think he's necessarily undeserving of this Oscar win, but I think Tim Robbins is more deserving of his Oscar win because he's playing just a more realistic character, if that makes sense. Like I just see it.
Yeah.
I think his performance is a little hammy, even though he's great. I think his performance is a little hammy, and I think Clint Eastwood, as good of a director as he is in this sense, maybe not the best composer because I think the music is also a little overdramatic. Like I think there are elements to this that make it feel a little bit more heavy-handed than it should be. Like Sean Penn's over-the-top nature sometimes, and the musical score. But I will say Sean Penn in his softer moments, especially in the moment where Kevin Bacon comes to him and is like, "We caught the kid," and you just see that just everything going on in Sean Penn's mind. He's not overacting there, and I think that is his Oscar scene because I really love just the subtle moments in that moment, in that scene especially. Like that to me is the best acting of his in this film.
Speaking of that, it's just interesting because I sat there and I like looked at my wife when I was watching this, and I was like, all right, I'm trying to figure this out because acting is such a subjective, just like all of art.
Yeah.
Acting is such
All
a
art,
subjective thing that I've heard the criticisms of. Sean Penn was overacting in that movie, but also Sean Penn won an Academy Award for that. And then I'm like watching it like that's my daughter. And I'm like, this seems kind of brilliant, but also like I can kind of see where other people are coming from, and I'm like, is this good acting? And I'm trying to, my voice is raising, like, is this good acting? And then I'm like, just trying to actually like figure that out. And then I don't know. It's
still a mystery, and that's fine.
Yeah.
This whole movie's a mystery.
Yeah, exactly.
Literally.
Speaking of that, that's another thing that I love and kind of hate about this movie. That love hate, kind of a thing, like a good kind of hate, because it's like hate it because of the ending is just sometimes somewhat so sad and also maddening. That the rest of the movie is such a great mystery because you're not let in on if he actually killed her, and you're thinking maybe he did, because like he has all this trauma built up that I could see him losing his innocence so early on, losing his childhood. He did not have a normal childhood. No way he had a normal childhood.
And he lost his friends because of that, because they distanced after that. Like, I think that's what stemmed their break apart. So that's also tough, seeing their relationship throughout too.
Yeah. And then to see Sean Penn's daughter, like so happy, on the verge of growing up and going out and finding herself, whatever she was going to go, had good plans to go to like Vegas or wherever the heck she was going with her boyfriend. And they were right about to do that. And she was having fun dancing on the bar. You see him looking at her, and you just see these like little things, and you're just like, he might have done it. Like, it was your first time watching it. You're like, he might have done it, because you can see him maybe be super jealous about her not having to go through what he did. Maybe he did that. Some people might go like, I would never wish that on my worst enemy, to go through what I did. But maybe he was jealous, and maybe he did do it. So,
or the fact that Sean Penn himself got to live a normal life and have a family too, which he has a family as well. What's it call it? Tim Robbins' character, but it's probably much different because
he's still kind of just going through the motions, and it's just he's never happy in the movie. He never shows like an ounce of happiness.
And you see the parallel of Sean Penn, like Emmy Rossum just goes out on her own with her friends, but every time Tim Robbins' kid goes out, Tim Robbins has to walk him to the bus because of the trauma. Because like it just shows in the way they allow their kids freedoms. Like Tim Robbins' son does not have all the freedoms that Emmy Rossum has, and they're different ages. But I just thought that was interesting too. One thing about the mystery element though, and the murder part of it, yes, I agree with what you said about like how sometimes you have to question for yourself whether Tim Robbins did it. The whole time I was thinking it was too easy for Tim Robbins to be the one, and especially when
Mhm.
he was about to die, I was like, yeah, he's definitely not the one because
Oh yeah.
otherwise, yeah, like the only thing is that the actual reveal of who it is, I feel is a little underwhelming because that character is barely a character to the point where like I guess that's the point is like it could have been anyone,
Yeah.
and the fact that it had to be just this random kid makes it all the more painful. But
Oh
also
yeah.
like I wish we had a little bit of inkling of like who this kid was in relation to all this and like a little bit more something just to have some sort of catharsis of like, oh, that was the guy. Because like when it happens, I'm like, wait, who was that kid again? You know,
Yeah.
and that's I think part of the reason why maybe on rewatch it'll work better for me. But in the moment, I
Mhm.
was like, oh, okay, you know,
Yeah, no, I mean, I could see how like maybe he could have peppered some more moments in here and there to kind of develop a little bit more. But I also do kind of like that they were just kids in the background the whole time. Like you see them in scenes. They're not just in that inn.
right.
They come through like they're that
Especially the
her,
mute brother, yeah.
yeah, it's her boyfriend's brother and his friend or whatever. And you can kind of see, and then just like to see that like vicious turn when he realizes what they did and he finds the gun and he's like, there was a gun here and I know who did it. And he's waiting for them. And it's so brutal the way he just kicks their asses and just stomps on this kid's face. It's like, holy shit. It's so crazy. And then when the cops come in and the kid has the gun and points it at him, and then you see him, the viciousness in that kid. I'm like, yeah, he totally did that shit. Like that kid's a little monster, and he
Yeah.
probably should be going to jail because he's insane.
And we don't
like,
necessarily get closure on his character, but it doesn't really matter. And
Yeah,
I like
no.
the parallel of that happening simultaneously with the whole Tim Robbins death because it's like, oh, the timing. Like if this had happened the night before, Tim Robbins wouldn't be dead. Or if this had happened earlier in the day, Tim Robbins wouldn't
Yeah.
be dead. But because you kind of see it simultaneously happening at the same time, it's like, oh,
Yeah.
there's never going to be that moment. You know, they
It's
they
so
have that
brutal.
conversation literally right after with Kevin Bacon and Sean Penn. And if they have that conversation before Sean
You're too
Penn
late.
essentially abducts Tim Robbins again. And that's another thing too, is that Tim Robbins gets in the car so easily at the end too. The trauma has consumed him so much that like at this point he's so stressed out about being this like suspect that he's willing to just get in the car again because he's probably like, you know what, it can't be worse than the first time, and that sucks too.
And
That's how he goes out. Essentially, the death of him as a child, like the death of what they once knew of him, and the real death of him, both started the same way, just getting into these two guys' cars.
Yeah.
It's sad.
And that is exactly a note that I wrote where I said the mirror of David getting in the car with the two men happens when he is a kid and when he's an adult. And they actually show it's kind of a very same shot of him getting in the car and then showing the back window of the car driving away. And it's just so ominous. And you know exactly what's about to go down as soon as he gets in that car, if you remember what happened in the very beginning. And it's just a lot of these like kind of callbacks. It's kind of like Master and Commander, where they call back and they use a lot of the things, and like it never got better than that one moment. Not better, but it never got better after that one moment happened to us when we were kids.
Yeah.
And like you know,
They
just the
never
way you
fully
see
cured themselves. Yeah.
no, yeah, and you just see like that Sean Penn probably doesn't become what he becomes if that didn't happen.
Yeah.
And Kevin Bacon, you see he's having trouble with his marriage and stuff like that. So they add like little character things with them as well to kind of build those characters up. And I just think this movie does that so well. Like you say, it's dense, but I feel like it just has so much in there that is just a really wonderful story. I mean, because it is based on a book, so it's like a lot of that story. I feel like Clint or whoever did Clint write it?
Brian Helgeland wrote it,
Helgeland.
and Dennis Lehane wrote the book. So
right,
Clint didn't have anything to do with the writing, but I mean, obviously, he has to translate it visually.
But I feel like the direction he added, you know, like you said, somewhat maybe a little bit too much or a little too little at times.
And it's more of the score than his direction for me. Like the music is, I think, a little overwhelming, but the direction itself, I think, is very well done. Yeah.
Very well done. And I think this is just like one of the I don't know if I want to say one of the best movies ever made. I think it is flawed in some areas, like we've mentioned a few things, but I do think for a crime film,
it's really
I don't think you can get much better, to be honest, for
there you go.
A crime film and a commentary on trauma. And
for sure.
yeah.
Yep. So Mystic River nominated for only 6, but it wins 2. So it wins a third of its nominations. It wins, obviously, 2 huge ones. Best Actor for Sean Penn, Best Supporting Actor for Tim Robbins. That would be Sean Penn's first. He would go on to win again for another film that we'll talk about eventually, and for Milk. And then he was also the film was also nominated for Picture, for Best Director for Clint Eastwood, Best Supporting Actress for Marcia Gay Harden, and Best Adapted Screenplay. So Sean Penn, he kind of had the lead going into Oscar night. You know, some people thought it might have been Bill Murray. Some people were even thinking Johnny Depp for A Curse of the Black Pearl. It was a real neck and neck horse race, but Sean Penn did pull ahead. But I wonder how the three of them would have fared against an actual horse. What about Seabiscuit? What about that horse race? Chad, tell us about Seabiscuit.
Sure. Seabiscuit, directed by Gary Ross, written by Gary Ross, cinematography by John Schwartzman, music by a friend in me, Randy Newman. Starring Tobey Maguire, Jeff Bridges, Chris Cooper, Elizabeth Banks, Gary Stevens, and William H. Macy. Synopsis: a horse race. No, scratch that. A boy grows into a man, and he wants to be a great horse racer. And then you have another man who likes to get into a lot of different things, and he ends up getting into horse racing. Yeah. I don't know. It's about a horse.
It's about horse racing. Yeah, it's about this little horse that could is how I put it in my review. Little horse that could, little Seabiscuit, because he is kind of a scrawnier little horse. He's underestimated, and Tobey Maguire is too. Tobey Maguire's blind in one eye from a boxing incident, and it's kind of like this jockey and this horse overcoming the odds and being champions. And Gary Stevens, actually, the jockey who replaces Tobey Maguire when he gets in his accent, is a real jockey. That's why I didn't recognize his name, because he's not an actor. He's a real jockey. So this is first and maybe only thing.
Good.
Yeah, very, very good. It was his first watch for you? This is first watch
yes,
for me? Okay.
Definitely a first watch for
so
me.
I think this is actually the only movie, actually no, Master and Commander, where we're fresh watchers, both of us. But this movie did not need to be as long as it did.
No.
In a year where Lord of the Rings: The Return of the King wins Best Picture, how does this movie end up feeling the longest of all the 5 nominees? I don't know. I think it feels very long. And that is partially, especially because horse racing is such a quick thing. It's like it's a few laps. Like you watch a horse race, it's like, wait, it's over already. Like it's a fast sport. So the fact that like baseball, it takes a long time, but this, it's not. And I just think that's interesting that this ends up feeling so long. It is so long, and that we don't even meet Seabiscuit for 45 minutes into the movie, which is quite alarming.
True.
But I'd love to know your thoughts, as I don't know if you're a fan of like racing movies or sports movies, how much, because we haven't really talked about many on here except for Moneyball, which is a very different type of sports movie. But,
very different.
Yeah. Like what were your thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, first, I forgot to say, based on Seabiscuit, An American Legend by Laura Hillenbrand. But yeah, no, I mean, I like this movie. I will say I still think a lot of the Lord of the Rings still feel very long, but I understand the pacing is better in those, and the content is better in those. No, I definitely understand what you're saying. I knew exactly where you're coming from. This one did feel pretty long, and I feel like a lot that is in the movie didn't necessarily need to be. On a first watch, I cannot tell you what I'd cut, but something.
Well, I think a lot of it is also, it takes so much time setting up the Great Depression, when I get it. If you've never heard of the Great Depression, somehow, if you're like a young viewer, maybe it's insightful, but it's also narrated by this guy, David McCullough, who is also not an actor. He's like a Pulitzer Prize winner who like has written a lot of books on like the Civil War. He's a historian, so they had him like do narration. He's done narration for other documentaries, but like it's almost presented as a documentary at first. It's like, it was the American Great Depression. And honestly, I was like, what is this movie? Like, is it a documentary about the Great Depression? Because like it didn't get into the horses for quite a while, and I was like, honestly, if I had to cut something, I'd probably cut that and do that in like a 2-minute montage at the beginning of like, this is the Great Depression. Here's how it started. Here's the shit that they're in. And like, here's Tobey Maguire. Like, I really don't think they needed the whole 45 minutes of setup to be like, this is the Great Depression from start to finish. And like,
I mean, I liked some of the like character stuff with Jeff Bridges trying to like, build up stuff and discover new things and do his inventions or whatever he was doing. But I totally agree with you there. But first off, I do want to add that this was this is another film other than the Spider-Mans that we see Toby and Elizabeth Banks together.
I didn't
which is
even
pretty.
remember that. I forgot
There you
Elizabeth Banks
go.
is in those Raimi movies. Wow,
Yep.
man.
She's J. Jonah Jameson's assistant or whatever.
Yeah.
but
She's
yeah,
got different hair color. That's probably why. I think she's got darker hair in this too. But
which I thought was really interesting because like Elizabeth Banks, I'm always just like I know her for like comedic stuff, and so to see her just have like a nice dramatic turn was very interesting.
yeah, even though she's playing a Mexican woman, I believe, or she's maybe not a Mexican woman, but because that's the thing is Jeff Bridges goes to Mexico and that's where he meets his wife. Her name is Marcela Zavala and becomes Marcela Zavala Howard. I don't know if she's supposed to be
I missed that
Mexican
part.
or if he just meets her in Mexico. But if she is playing Mexican, I think that's a very misguided choice. I don't think she's playing a Mexican woman, but they meet in Mexico, so I don't know.
I mean,
I don't know her actual nationality. I didn't look up her actual background. Nor do I really care, but.
There's like light-skinned Spanish-speaking people, but I just I wouldn't see that in Elizabeth Banks. No,
and
not
I
at
love
all.
Elizabeth Banks, but she's very white bread. Like
she's
like
not
white
like a
bread with butter.
Latina.
The blonde hair and all.
No, but I definitely agree with you. Where it's weird when I see a movie and I see it advertised as one thing, like, oh, this is the movie about horse racing. This is really cool. I want to see that horse movie. And stuff like that, all the sports movies, whatever. And then you get into it, and like you said, it's kind of like a documentary about the Great Depression. And I said the narration is like the narration from Anchorman, which in that movie it's very funny.
Yeah, it's
but
just
in
comedic purpose. Yeah.
This movie, I agree with you that on one hand, it's kind of like an epic in a way where it's like this is bigger than you thought. That we're going to talk about all this stuff. We're going to set the scene. But like you said, that also kind of makes it feel long. And maybe they could have had some of that, but shortened it. But they keep cutting to it and just like scenes of him pictures of people and just him talking about things. And maybe that might not be needed. Maybe it'd be a better movie. If not, I don't know. I haven't seen that version. But I agree with that.
It would be like if Moneyball, if it was 45 minutes of and then the game of baseball was invented, and then 45 minutes later it's like, and now this is the owner of the A's, Billy Beane, and this is his story. It's like, why? Or like Saving Private Ryan, like here's how the war started. Now 45 minutes in, like at Normandy, and it's like, no, like we don't want to wait. Like give us Normandy, baby. That's excited as I could be about Normandy, but like you know what I mean.
No, that's definitely a really great point. I agree with you. And I think it did kind of drag down the movie a little bit, but there's a lot of still really great stuff in this. I'll say I liked this movie. I did not love this movie, but I enjoyed it. I thought I would enjoy it because I like horse stuff as long as it's not soup. What?
I thought you were going to say Toby because I know
I do like Toby.
Toby stands. No, I like Toby.
It's interesting because knowing what I know about Tobey Maguire as like a person and the way he seems kind of like more of like a hothead in real life. I don't know if you knew this, but like he's like blown up on paparazzi.
Yeah, I've seen that video. Yeah.
He is known. If you've ever seen what is that? Molly's Game. Michael Cera plays a character at the poker table that is based on Tobey Maguire because he was known to be this guy who would go play these like back alley poker games.
I didn't know that.
So he's got a whole other side to him. I'm not saying he's like a problematic figure or anything, but he sounds like he's
a celebrity. He sounds like a celebrity.
Sounds like a typical celebrity that's kind of got a little bit hot under the collar sometimes, which is interesting because he's so not that guy in the Spider-Man movies. So us knowing him mostly from those, to see him in this where he is kind of an angry kind of guy, but I'm like, that's a little bit more closer to maybe a real life. But seeing him in this, I understand why he's so angry because like his parents gave him up. And he's blind, like you said, he wants to be a racer. And then he gets injured and just like this kid is put through the ringer.
A tough break. Yeah.
Like
the horse. I mean, there's a parallel between him and the horse. Which is a little on the nose, but yeah.
It is on the nose. It's very on the nose, but I love the parallel that they make because it reinforces like one of my favorite lines from this whole slate of movies is just the Chris Cooper, which I didn't actually I started to not like Chris Cooper's character towards the end of the movie as much. Because he started to lose sight of what he even said, and Jeff Bridges had to remind him of it. But the thing that he said is, you don't throw a whole life away just because he's a banged up a little. That made me tear up And
Aw.
it takes a special kind of line or movie to do that, because I just think about like all of the, not just animals and creatures in general, but just people who are really, just like thrown away because, or just like totally dismissed because they have some sort of disability or something happens to them, or they're just like looked at as, somebody who's never going to amount to anything. And it's like, well, if you keep telling them that, then they're not. But like horses that get injured, and the first reaction is, let's shoot it. Let's just kill it, because it's no. And that also reminds me of like a parallel that I thought of a movie, Get Out, which is another fantastic movie that we'll talk about one day. The idea of a creature or a person being only valued for the utility, like what can you bring to me, what your value. And it's also fitting that a man like Fred Rogers died that year that Seabiscuit came out, a man that said, no, you have inherent value and worth, and you are special just for being you. And somebody who can impart a message like that to someone is really what this brought to me. That one line in this movie was like, that line just made the movie for me, really. From there on out, I was like, I'm gonna like this movie, because it just showed us. And I was like, I know these people are going to take care of this horse, and they're going to be really nice to this horse and love this horse and value this horse, not just because he can win races, but because he is a life to be valued, and just a beautiful thing. And that is what I loved about this movie too, is just the respect that they put on the horse, on Tobey Maguire's character when he is put through the ringer. Jeff Bridges repeats that line to Chris Cooper later in the movie. He's like, you're not just going to get rid of him just because he's a little banged up, because he's like, well, he should probably quit now because he got super injured and he can never ride again. And then he ends up teaching that jockey guy that you told about how to ride Seabiscuit, and he ends up, winning or something, I think, right? And then I thought it was a little cheesy, like the final thing when Toby finally is able to get on the Seabiscuit, and he's advised not to do it, but he's like, I'm going to do it, damn it. And then you're like, Toby, I don't know, man. But like he gets on it, he rides them, and he's successful in the score, and it's just a great moment. And I'm like, it worked.
It's your classic
anyway,
sports
so
movie, hoorah. Yeah. I'm glad you got a lot more out of it than I did. The one thing I will say, my favorite part before you continue, because this is the last thing I have to say about it. William H. Macy is the standout for me. I love his little character. I love the radio. I love.
He's another J. Jonah Jameson kind of.
Yeah, I love the idea of like using the old radio, like him, like using the what are they called? Shoes. I lost the name. The shoes to make it sound like he's running across the room. I think that's fun. I love all the little like old technology bits that they show in this, like just give it a sense of time and place, even if he's on screen only a few amount of times in this film. He was nominated for some awards for this, not at the Oscars, but he was the cast member that was more nominated places. No one from the cast was nominated at the Oscars, but he was nominated for a few places for his little supporting role here. So good for him. But what did you want to say to wrap this up?
Oh, well, because you asked me about like my opinion on sports movies and stuff in general. But like, I enjoy sports movies when they're really well done. I love a lot of movies like Battle of the Sexes, Borg versus McEnroe. King Richard was really good from last year. Rush. Did you finally watch Rush?
I did watch Rush. I watched it for the Chris Hemsworth movie club I did. I thought it was good.
That's right. Yeah. So movies when they're really well done, when they focus on the characters and they just have stuff, but also if they're thrilling, which I wouldn't say this one is necessarily that. I thought like Rush was a lot more thrilling than this was, but a lot of the character stuff and the messaging in the movie of Seabiscuit that I really liked more than the actual sports stuff. So.
Yeah, there you go. Well, Seabiscuit, unfortunately, is the only movie that didn't win any Oscars that day. But, I mean, when you're competing against Lord of the Rings and don't have any acting nominations, it's going to be hard. But it did get nominated for 7 Oscars: Picture, Adapted Screenplay, Sound Mixing, Art Direction, Cinematography, Costume Design, and Film Editing. So there's our slate. That's it. All 5 movies. Now we have the tough task, and this is a tough task. As much as people want to say there's a far runaway winner. We've talked about these films. You and I both like the 3 of these films evenly. You like a few of them more than I do, but like we like these films a lot. So this will be tough. I'll start it off at number 5, and this should be no surprise given that I had the least amount to say on it, but I'm going to put Seabiscuit at number 5.
Seabiscuit is also my number 5.
All right, let's see if we continue this trend. My 4 is Lost in Translation.
My 4 is Master and Commander: The Far Side of the World.
Okay.
I liked it a lot, but I liked
that just goes to show
all
how
of these
good the slate
movies.
is.
Yeah.
My number 3 is Mystic River.
My number 3 is Lost in Translation.
All right. My number 2 is Master and Commander: The Far Side of the World.
Okay, my number 2, Mystic River.
Which means our number 1, and this may not be a surprise, but it was a lot closer to being dethroned because I think the extended is better, is The Lord of the Rings: The Return of the King, and that is our pick. I think it is still great, despite me liking the extended edition more. I just think Master and Commander, give it a few more watches, it could be number 1, but like I really did like this slate and or those top 3 movies on my ranking, but Lord of the Rings is like the all-timer for me, and it didn't feel right to give the first 2 my number 1 spot and this one not, because I think it is still a very strong film. So.
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting because Seabiscuit was never in the running for the top for me, even though I like that movie. But the rest of the 4 all easily could have been number 1. And I almost was thinking about putting Mystic River number 1 because it's so great.
Yeah. I mean, it's great, some great films there, yeah.
But Return of the King, yeah, I'm like, do I do it again? Because last month I said Chicago, and I got my way.
Yeah, and the month before, I almost said In the Bedroom, but it ultimately went to Fellowship. So it hasn't been a clean sweep, just so you know. So if you didn't listen to the earlier episodes, like Chicago won last month, Fellowship won the month before, but now we're getting 2 of the 3 Best Picture choices.
Yeah, and I was just like, do I do it this time? And then like the ending happened to me of Return of the King, and I was like, this is such a great ending to this trilogy. I was like, I got to give it, just for the strength of that ending alone, I think sells it. So
yeah. So that is our choice for Best Picture: Lord of the Rings: Return of the King. Now we have to give out our Best Actor and Best Actress prizes. I'm first for Best Actor, and this was tough. There were a lot of good performances, but last month I did hint that there is a performance I love, one of the best in cinema, that I didn't get to award last time because I was passionate enough about giving a different film the award last month. This month, I'm going to right that wrong. Andy Serkis as Gollum. It's one of those performances that I just adore.
Oh, shit.
I love him. I like him more in Two Towers, but I think I haven't awarded him yet, and I think he deserves to be, when we look at the picture of this actors, he deserves to be up there as one of the best performances in film. We are not going to be talking about the Planet of the Apes movies, so I'm not going to get to award him there. I just think he's a great performer and such a different craft than we're used to seeing. He just does something that so many actors could never replicate. And for that reason, even though I think he's better in the second film, he's still great in this one. And especially the stuff where we see him as a human or as a hobbit. I love that stuff. I just think his character is one of the most iconic in history. And that is why I don't know if I made this harder for you, Chad, or not, but I'm going to give him the Best Actor prize for The Return of the King, just because I really felt like I owed it to him to give him something. And I wasn't able to do it last month. I forget who I gave it to last month. Who did I? Oh, Daniel Day-Lewis. So that's another case where like that's also one of my favorite roles ever is Billy the Butcher. So it's like it was very hard. I could have awarded it to him last month, but I wanted to give Daniel Day-Lewis a spotlight, knowing I could award Andy Serkis here. So Andy Serkis is my pick. What's up, Chad? You look
no, it's interesting. No, it's just interesting because like I have been on record saying that I think Caesar is his best thing ever, but we can't. Obviously, that wasn't whatever. I think Gollum is okay. I like him a lot in it, but people I think oversell him in that role. But I love that you love it. I think that's great that was because this is a stacked year for like actor performances specifically. And the fact that you're like Andy Serkis, hands down above all those, I'm like, wow, okay, cool. That's
and
amazing.
Our show can allow to nominate or bring up performances that the Academy necessarily wouldn't. Like I brought up Lee Fierro in Jaws. She's a very small character, but like she's got a big impact. That scene where she breaks down about her kid, I'm like, oh my God, it's so good. And there's another case where like the Academy would never nominate a performance like this. I hope they do someday, but like you're not going to see it anytime soon, at least. And that's why I was like very passionate about making sure that like if I could, I would. And that's
then I love the choice. I'm glad that you chose it. Oh,
I know I made your job harder. I'm sure you were hoping I would narrow down your choices.
Yes. So here's my thought process. I thought you were gonna go with Sean Astin because you love Samwise Gamgee, and I do too.
I love the character
and I was
a lot. It's just the performance isn't like It's great, but
I was in between that and the one that I'm gonna pick because I don't want to just slam the Lord of the Rings with everything.
right.
And a lot of these are so even for me that I'm gonna give it to what I thought like just like every single time just affects me so much. I'm gonna give it to, I believe again, Tim
I know
Robbins,
yep, that's a second.
Mystic River.
Yep.
Um,
He won
I
on
just
our very first show, 1994. He
did.
was your choice for best actor, and he wasn't even nominated in the Oscars that year. So this is righting so many wrongs.
Criminal. Yeah. Shawshank is one of my favorite films of all time. Mystic River is definitely up there. It's not like quite like in my top 100 or anything. But he just the emotional turmoil that he's in. He sells being that guy that went through that so well the whole movie, and it's just such a crushing performance that like I just it's, and there's so many great ones. It's seriously like Russell Crowe, Paul Bettany. There's so many that you could list that you could have just said. Bill Murray, exactly.
Even Sean
but,
Penn, which I think he has great moments, even though I think it's a little heavy-handed. Like I think it's great.
Yeah, but Tim Robbins, and I'll say a specific scene because sometimes we like to do specific moments. I'll say, just that scene that I had to skip. just the one where he's like,
it's because he's so good. Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah. It's so heartbreaking. All right.
I know.
Do you have
cry.
a specific Andy
Circus
one?
No, honestly, it's probably from Two Towers when he's having that monologue back and forth with himself.
Yes,
but obviously,
I
didn't choose that film, but I honestly like the progression into Gollum at the beginning. I just think it's well acted, even though the voice is a little weird at times. I do think the actual progression is good. He sells that well. So, Chad, you're first for actress, and I will admit I think the actor pool is a lot bigger than the actress pool, considering movies like Master and Commander and Seabiscuit don't have many women in it at all. Or Master Commander doesn't have any women in it at all. So the pool is a little smaller, but still some great actresses to choose from. So who do you pick as your best actress?
I'm gonna go with ScarJo, Lost in Translation.
Nice. Very nice.
She's just like basically the star of that movie. I just love Scarlett Johansson in a lot of other movies. We'll get to other performances that she's done that I think are brilliant. That I just love her. And
the movie, in this movie, or the actress her, because she's in that. Did it?
I love both.
Talk about.
Hers also great. But yeah, Scarlett in this movie just really sells that character. And like I said, that relationship between them just works for me. It's like the relationship in Licorice Pizza, even though that one is a little bit more problematic. I'll give it to you. I still love the relationship between them. And just like in this one, I adored the relationship. I was just so affected towards the end, and it was because of her just innocent performance, her just like speculation on like just the world. Did she make the wrong choice in marrying this guy? I'm always making choices and going, did I fuck up? Did I make the wrong choice here? Always thinking that every single choice I make, I'm like that. And then I'm like, and so just I identify with her, and just, I'd be the same way, just kind of meandering, just like wonder what the hell do I do now? I'm in Japan. My husband's gone. So yeah, I love her in that movie, and just she's so great.
Yeah. So like I said, the pool is a little slimmer for the women, unfortunately, but I'm gonna go with, only because I think her moments are some of my favorite in the movie she's in. I'm tripling down on this movie. I'm picking Miranda Otto from The Lord of the Rings: The Return of the King as Éowyn. It's a little bit unconventional, but I really like the statements her character makes with Mary of being like that underdog, not necessarily just a woman on the battlefield, but just an underdog in general, and the whole like I am no man thing. Like I kind of love that. Like I just love the acting through that, and I know we're not counting the extended editions, but she has some great moments in that as well. That she's my favorite female character in the Lord of the Rings movie. So like I like that. Okay. I want to give her that platform, because I love Cate Blanchett, I love Liv Tyler, but she's the surprise. Like she's like the more like relatable, I guess. Even though the other two are amazing as well. But yeah, like I think that moment is just so good, and I do really like her. So, and
I like that scene that she has with her like uncle, I believe it is, where he's dying. She's got to console him and stuff. She's great. And I really want to, because I've never done this, but I really want to do one of those extended edition marathons where I just watch all three in one day or whatever.
I don't
It's
even think
a
I've ever done that. I've
big
always
task,
separated them.
but
Yeah.
I think I'd probably get more out of her character if I do watch the extended edition, because I've probably only seen it once.
Yeah. There you go. So to recap, our best picture. Actually, let me start with the best actor. Our best actor is Andy Serkis as Gollum in Lord of the Rings. Chad's is Tim Robbins in Mystic River. My best actress is Miranda Otto in Lord of the Rings: Return of the King. And Chad's is Scarlett Johansson in Lost in Translation. And our best picture for 2003 is The Lord of the Rings: The Return of the King. So 2 of these 3 years we aligned with the Oscars, Chicago and Lord of the Rings. 2 of these 3 years we went Lord of the Rings, Fellowship, and this one. But we were not unanimous across the board, which is fun because it creates a more unexpected show, I think, and it's been really fun covering this series as a whole. But as we move on, of course, next month is October, which means it's spooky season, which, again, like I said, there are genre films that are not normally seen, or like Chad said with Hogwarts and like Harry Potter, some genre films are not given their due in the Oscars' eyes, and horror is definitely one of them. Fantasy being another, like we've talked about Harry Potter, but horror is not one of them. But there are still some horror movies that have been nominated. Last year we did The Exorcist, which did not win, but was nominated. We have other horror movies that we're going to talk about in future years that came out and were technically, Halloween or horror inspired related, that were nominated for Best Picture. But now, next month, we're going to talk about the one that actually won, the only horror movie to win Best Picture. I'll get to that at the very end of this list because there are 4 movies ahead of that. We're doing the year 1991. So if you see where I'm going, you kind of know, hello, Clarice.
The year my wife was born.
With this. Oh, wow, very interesting. So the 5 movies we're talking about for October, 4 of these are not necessarily Halloween related. One of them is a horror film at the very end. But the first one has some magical horror elements at times.
Yeah.
It is the Disney classic Beauty and the Beast, followed by Bugsy, JFK, The Prince of Tides, and the long-teased Halloween film, or at least horror film, The Silence of the Lambs. You can't forget all the thes there, as we learned this
it's
episode.
a big awards movie. It's like one of the big movies. I'm not to show my hand here. I do really love this movie. Yeah. It's one of the movies that does represent the horror genre so well. We will get to that next month, and I'm so excited for it.
Yeah, it's one of 3 movies that has ever won Best Picture, Director, Screenplay, Actor, and Actress. It's one of only 3 films. We've covered one of them. We've covered on One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. We have not covered It Happened One Night. That will happen one year, one day, one night. But next month, we are covering Silence of the Lambs, 1991, as well as the only 2D animation film nominated for Best Picture, and the first animated film nominated for Best Picture.
And I was looking, I was looking this up, and there's long movies, so get prepared for that.
Oh yeah, all right.
Some of them are very long. JFK is like 3.5 hours, so
love it. You know what? Great, especially because we're gonna try to get this recording in early. That's exactly what I want to hear. Just kidding. I'm very excited. JK, just kidding. JFK looks really fun. Well, actually, I don't know much about it, so I can't say if it's fun or not, but I'm very excited for all these films and for you to watch along if you want to. I can't give you the streaming info because the streaming info changes every month, but Disney Plus will have Beauty and the Beast, so that's a start. Chad, where can they find you as we head into the year 1991?
Yeah, very excited. Yeah, I've been ramping up a lot of like Letterboxd stuff. You can find me there. It's Deets or below, I believe. Chadwick Webb. Find me like that. Here, I do Draft Day sometimes right on this channel, Dill Pickle Movie Network, which is a really fun show. We're doing Lord of the Rings, like he said, at the top. But also over at the Nerd Entertainment Network with my wife, Carrie, and my friend, Hunter, we do Welcome to Primetime. It's a little bit of a Nightmare on Elm Street nod there. Is the show we do. We talk a lot of things horror. We do a lot of like Buffy talk, and we talk about a lot of the episodes there. We're doing Us pretty soon because we have been doing a Jordan Peele series, and we talked Nope, Get Out, and now we're going to go do Us. I'm very excited for that. We talked a lot of other great stuff like Midnight Mass, which was highly snubbed from the Emmys. I've been very vocal about that.
Celebrating its 1-year anniversary today or this week, I think. So
Midnight Mass?
Because Squid Game is, so and I know it came out around the same time. So Squid Game came out a year ago around this time. We were not going to date the show, but yeah.
check that out because Mike Flanagan's one of the best horror directors working today, and it's his magnum opus, whatever the
Magnum
term is.
opus. You got it.
There you go. You can find me also on like a TMG debate, movie battlegrounds. I do pretty well over there. I like to debate. It's really fun. But check out a lot of those episodes if you enjoy movie discussion or arguments or fighting, whatever. It's really fun. A lot of great topics come up over at TMG YouTube Worlds. And then on my channel, and Dylan and I might have plans in the works to kind of cross promote a little bit there. I do some rankings with friends. Dylan has been on there quite a few times. We've done Christmas, Harry Potter, what else? Edgar Wright. We did all 3 phases of MCU. We will get to the 4th one once that wraps up. And then we're going to do a Denis Villeneuve soon because we love him. And then you can find that. It's just my name, Chadwick Webb. But yeah.
Yeah,
I had fun.
This
was a great ranking.
Yeah, it was great. A great discussion too. We're very long episode, but again, Lord of the Rings very long. Seabiscuit feels very long. Master and Commander, Mystic River, both very long. Lost in Translation, not long at all, but it created a long discussion. So I'm glad we had as in-depth discussions as we did because these are 5 movies that I think warrant them. At least 4 of them warrant the discussion. So all the movies warrant discussion, but like the lengthy discussions, I think a lot of these warranted them. You can find me at Dylan_Randazzo at Letterboxd or Twitter, preferably but if you would like to choose one or the other, go ahead. Dill Pickle Movie Network is where you see this show every month. You can check out other shows like Frame Rack, like you said, Draft Day, Marvelous Movie Mondays, especially Marvel Trivia, which we have some cool episodes coming out soon. Getting into the title season, it's coming soon. Kelsey's got to defend that belt at some point. And otherwise, check me out here doing reviews, especially as Oscar season trickles on. Halloween, I've got maybe something brewing for a Halloween video and a video which I'll wait a little bit because I'm going to start a series in October about a certain set of films that I don't want to let on yet, but it may have something to do with another film that we're talking about next month on the channel. So Chad knows what it is, but I'll wait till we'll wait till that happens to talk about it. So lots of exciting stuff coming to the channel though, nonetheless. So thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time for 1991.